10, 11 directors.
Correct.
Yeah, and Sierra's in here. She's just not got her video on, I think.
Went to get her microphone. She's down at the bottom here.
Okay, tell them they're live. I'm here, but it's not letting me turn it on now. I might have to reboot it again. Don't worry, I'll be back on.
We're now live.
Thank you.
Okay, so I can start the meeting. Okay, good morning, everyone. Have a little patience with me. This is our first live meeting for me to be chairing. And I'd like to welcome you to the Regional Services Committee for April 22nd, 2020. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we are in the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And also like to acknowledge that we have alternate director Sandhu with us. I don't see her on our screen, but just wanted to acknowledge that. And also acknowledge that we had a terrible tragedy happen over the weekend, and our hearts go out to our fellow Canadians in Nova Scotia, which we have our flags at half-mast at the Calgary Regional District. So with that, I would look for an adoption of the minutes, and I would request if you could hold your hands up for me visually, as you know, you could do both if you want, but visually, yeah, the great Al, just to help me out for today. So a motion to move has been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Point of order.
Yes.
Approve the agenda first.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I had my screen slowed. Yes. Thank you very much. This is an approval of the agenda. So moved, second, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving now to the adoption of the minutes of February 26, 2020. Is there a mover? Moved, seconded, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Not seeing any opposed. Moving on now to any business arising from the minutes. Ms. Legault.
There's none. Thank you, Chair.
And then we're moving on now to the public input period. Do we have any public input, Ms. Legault?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have two items.
Excuse me, I had a hand from Director Nicholson. Director Nicholson? Director Nicholson? No, go ahead, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Chair. I have two items of public input. The first is from, just open the email here. First is from Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. He writes, on today's agenda is a report from the Parks and Trails Division regarding Parks and Trails tree management policy. We value all our trees and know how important they are for our watersheds, but some trees can damage neighboring property. Trees planted too close to property lines can cause all sorts of problems. Trees can grow to over 100 feet high and have limbs that can break off in windstorms and pierce a house roof or injure people. Roots can grow across boundary lines and damage drain fields, heave driveways and walks. Trees can grow tall enough to shade solar panel installation and render them almost useless. The public would like to see the CVRD Parks and Trails tree management policy be extended to a CVRD tree management policy that protects neighbors from tree problems. When new subdivisions are established beside CVRD trails or property, the trees must be taken into consideration. Please defer R2 for further public input. Cliff Evans. I have a second item.
Go ahead, Ms. Legault.
From Susan Kaufman. Good morning, Madam Chair. I would like to support and endorse Mr. Evans' submission, read the CVRD Parks policy. When important policies are made, shouldn't we encourage the Parks Department to engage the public on the content or intent of these policies? From the public's point of view, there are confusing viewpoints on what and what not the jurisdiction or ability the CVRD has in regards to tree protection and removal guidelines, not only within our parks, but other areas of land within the CVRD. And that concludes the submissions for public input period.
Thank you very much. Moving on now, we have no delegations, and I don't believe we have any other correspondence. We move directly to reports. This is R1, and this is a report from the Parks and Trails Division, re 2019 Parks and Trails Visitation. And this is for information. Is there someone that will be presenting this? or are there any questions? Will we have anybody speaking to this? Director Smith, you have a question?
Yes, my question is, when they're recording vehicles, is there a specific number of bodies that are attached to that vehicle so that when we see the count, quite a few vehicles come and go from, I know, Centennial Park, but they're one person in them. So I'm just wondering if the count includes 4 or 5 or 2. So can staff please clarify that? Thank you.
That'd be Mr. Farquhar.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, for vehicle counts, we typically use around about a 2.5 to 3 persons per vehicle. However, on occasion, we do go out and monitor locations to see if the numbers are consistent with that averaging that we're providing for vehicles going into parking lots, because we do understand that there is some variability between various parks in terms of groups going to parks or individuals. So it is something that we do monitor, and over time, if we're noting adjustments, we would be making those adjustments to the counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farquhar. And we also have another question from Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Farquhar. I'm noting the areas that are covered, and I know that the electoral area F had chosen not to invest in counters, but I see a number of regional parks are covered. On what basis are you choosing the parks to cover, and what would be required to have additional parks covered, community parks covered in the various electoral areas?
Mr. Farquhar?
Madam Chair, as can be appreciated with over 70, 80, 90 parks between regional parks and community parks that have developed trails or parking lots and the like, it would be quite an undertaking and a cost to set up counts at every single park. So between community parks in particular across the electoral areas, we have focused on those parks that we believe provide a good representative sample of the types of parks within our communities that can give us an idea of the levels of use seasonally that take place. Everything from more popular community parks like Quarry Nature Park in Cobble Hill to smaller parks such as Yellow Point Park up in Area H, where we're giving sort of that range. So we can certainly look at the parks in Area F, and if there's one in particular that's of interest to monitor, we can look at setting something up. At times, however, where there's multiple access points, and I'm thinking of somewhere like Central Park in Honeymoon Bay, it might be a little challenging because of the variability of how people are accessing that park, everything from driving to parking lots to walking from within the community. So we can certainly look at that with the area director and the Advisory Park Commission at a potential site in the Area F to include. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farquhar. Are there any more questions with this report? We have Councillor Justice. I recognize Councillor Justice, and then Director Kuhn.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was just curious about what other sorts of analyses are being done with this data. I'm not entirely sure how much data you get out of them. Do you get time of day and which days of the week people are visiting and that sort of thing? And are you exploring the data further than just sort of how many people are coming per year? What sort of analysis are you doing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellent question. Yes, the counters that are in use now are quite technical. We can actually track over each hour use. So we can track days of the week, times of the day. And this is being applied in terms of how our parks maintenance services, for example, are being used. So we know when more popular times of the day are. We can work around that in terms of when our parks maintenance contractor is there. It's also informative in terms of understanding levels of use at entry points, in particular things like the Cowichan Valley Trail, to help us as staff understand better the level of use. And when questions or issues come up around how busy it is or lack of parking on days, we can go back in and look at those days and understand, is it the entire day that the parking lot is completely full, or are there just peak times? And that can help inform when we bring forward matters for the committee board to consider in terms of further investment in our sites, supported by the data in terms of actual use.
Thank you.
You turn off your microphone, Director Justice. Oh, and I recognize Director Kuhn.
Yes, to Mr. Farquhar. I noticed that you didn't include Bald Mountain Park. We had a survey done some years ago, and I wonder why did you leave that one off?
Mr. Farquhar.
Madam Chair, again, it comes down to budget and capacity and the number of parks that we have across the region. So certainly, if there is interest in looking at putting something in on Old Bald Mountain Park in electoral area I, we could certainly look at setting something up. We do have an established parking area there. We could either look to count vehicles, or we could put a counter on the main trail. So I'll chat with staff to see what we could put into play as early as this year.
Thank you.
Great. Is there any other questions for Mr. Farquhar on this report? Seeing no other hands up, and this was for information, I'll now move on to R2. And R2 is a report from the Parks and Trails Division re Parks and Trails Tree Management Policy, and there is a recommendation here. So I would, are there any questions on this? I know we had some public input on this. Yes, there is. Director Wilson, please. I recognize Director Wilson, and then Director Smith. Was it Director Smith? Okay, ooh, whole bunch of hands. All righty. Okay, thank you. I'll start with Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wave at me if you can hear. I got a new headset here for a fancy thing. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thanks. Sounds good.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, regarding the public input from Mr. Evans and Ms. Kaufman, I wonder if Mr. Farquhar would comment on that kind of thing. I know it's probably outside of the park's purview, but certainly there's a couple of good points which were made there as far as the tree management is concerned. Thank you.
Mr. Farquhar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I may also defer to Ann Cheroff on this one, because at the end of the day, this policy is applicable only to lands managed by the CVRD for parks. Within electoral areas, currently the provincial legislation does not provide for something like a tree bylaw on private properties. So a tree management policy overall to apply to private lands within electoral areas is not something that the regional district can currently enact. So this is specific to how the regional district currently manages through best practices trees within our parks that are managed by the regional district, and moving the best management practices into a policy. So it's really reaffirming through a policy how things are currently done within our parks, and expands a little bit in terms of recognizing the overall value of trees with our parks, within our communities, and an overall conservation approach in terms of how the policy would be applied in terms of managing these trees. Everything from planting trees to care of trees to decisions around tree removal. So it brings a greater level of clarity, both for park visitors who see trees within our parks, as well as neighbors to our parks, where we do on a regular basis have issues arising with respect to trees being brought to the attention of the regional district within a park by a neighboring property. So through a policy, it'll be providing that clarity in terms of how the regional district manages trees within our parks, which, as I said, is currently done through a best management approach.
There a follow-up, Director Wilson? You're fine? I have a speakers list, and I want to confirm Director Morrison and Director Smith. Who else would like to speak? Director Sebring and Director Justice and Director Nicholson. Go ahead, Director. I recognize Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm read through the report, and it's excellent, and echo what Mr. Farquhar said. I think that this now puts into a policy practices that staff have been carrying out for a number of years. I just had a question as to how this will actually work on the ground, because I've had a number of instances where RV park owners that are next to our parklands have sort of preemptively approached me and have approached staff when they see a tree that may be 2 or 3 degrees leaning off of vertical, and in their eyes they assess that to be an immediate and present danger to their RVs, and when really they're perfectly healthy trees, and but they view it as a danger. So if you're approached on in a scenario similar to that, how are staff actually going to interpret the policy and explain that to the public when they view something obviously as a little differently than our professional staff would?
Mr. Farquhar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellent question. And again, this goes back to the best management practices that the regional district has been applying for a number of years. The policy reaffirms that within our parks, we have, for the most part, a healthy canopy of trees. And on occasion, we are approached by neighbors to our parks who express a concern about a particular tree. And at that stage, what we generally do is we have it assessed by a professional arborist or tree assessor for hazard trees to determine the overall health of the tree and whether or not there is a degree of risk in terms of the condition of the tree. And if there is, then accordingly, through the best management practices that have been in place thus far and through this tree management policy, efforts will be taken upon the tree to either look at complete removal, if that's the outcome of the assessment, partial removal or trimming in terms of branches of concern, or establishment of a wildlife habitat tree that still brings value to the park, to the ecosystem, but allays any concerns with respect to liabilities or risks to the neighboring property.
Thank you. I recognize Director Smith, so I have Director Smith, Sebring, Justice, Nicholson, and Haim. So I'll go to Director Smith.
Thank you. I really appreciate seeing the tree management policy on the agenda today. One of the things that I think is that this is for individual trees within our parks, and most of our parks and trails are actually small forests. And that I believe that the CBRD needs a forest management plan and policy for inventory of the forest, viability, health, planting, and succession for the future. The forest cedar trees are dying due to drought conditions. Climate change impact on these forests will assist with tree planting. Having a silviculturalist, forestry qualified person going in, or firm going in and looking at the trees as a whole. We are seeing changes within our forested parks, and we should also be looking in that direction. Individual trees are definitely a concern, but I think we need to start looking at the bigger picture under a forestry management policy or plan. Will the Parks and Trails Department be looking at that type of, Mr. Farquhar?
Madam Chair, certainly if that is the overall direction of the committee and board, to put some resources and energy towards an overall forest management approach for our larger parks that have, as Director Smith has noted, viable ecosystems within them. That is certainly something that we can endeavor to undertake as well, separate from this tree management policy.
Thank you, Mr. Farquhar. I now have Director Sebring.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kudos to staff, good report. I just wanted to address the public input, and while I appreciate what was asked, those are two different things. What we're talking about here is the stuff in our parks. What I heard being asked was, any properties adjacent to or anything to do with new development or perhaps a tree cutting bylaw. Mr. Farquhar has already addressed the fact that we're not legislatively equipped to do that. On that basis, I mean, we're spending a lot of time on this, and to me, it's just a basic report that says this is how we want to do it in our parks. The broader discussion is a broader discussion for another time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I recognize Director Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank Director Smith for seeing the forest for the trees. I think that is an important policy for future development. I've got a couple of related questions. On page 3 of the report, it says that a tree can be removed if it's determined to be inhibiting the normal development of a more desirable tree. And I was curious about what a more desirable tree was, how that's defined, and maybe that's related to replanting. And I'm wondering about how species are determined when you are replanting a tree, and whether there's a preference for trees that are native to the biogeoclimatic zone. Thanks.
Mr. Farquhar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So certainly it will be on a case-by-case basis when a situation arises where a tree may be inhibiting a more desirable tree. It could be that it is a non-native tree that is inhibiting native species, so that could be a factor for removal of that non-native tree. It could be the form and shape of the tree to be removed is not as healthy in terms of its growth versus a tree or two beside it that otherwise is being inhibited by way of sunlight or space. So in terms of providing a better canopy and a more desirable native tree to grow over time, those would be the sort of criteria that be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And certainly in terms of trees going into our parks overall, where it's in a manicured area, perhaps next to a picnic area, consideration of the sort of trees that go in may be more focused on providing shade and canopy and sort of overall health in terms of the conditions of that site that may be determinate in terms of considering a native species tree to Vancouver Island versus a non-native. However, looking at other park spaces in our more natural areas, we definitely want to be looking at planting native species overall based on the site conditions in terms of the soils, the water levels, as well as sunlight. And those will be determined in terms of the type of trees that would be considered. So again, park by park, site by site, there will be a level of assessment done under the tree management policy. But overall, those would be the premises for the approach to undertake looking at the trees. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize Director Nicholson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a good start, the tree policy, having it written down how we're doing business right now. But I think I'm very pleased to hear Director Smith's comments and Director Justice's. Really what we're looking at is the policy is, as Mr. Farquhar mentioned, basically a policy that you can apply on a case-by-case basis. It lacks an ecological framework, which I think is really important for us to think about as we move forward. We're dealing with many of our properties are important forested ecosystems and not just forested, but riparian and other types of ecosystems. And I think it's really important, given climate change and the stresses that they're under now, that we have a good idea of the inventory and the relative importance of them ecologically, and that we build management plans proactively to improve their resilience and restore their functions, because many of them have been damaged by past practices. So I really think that's a direction we need to move in. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. Thank you. Moving on to alternate Director Haim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regards to, I like the idea of documenting and defining the policy as opposed to kind of past practices where it may be done, but it wasn't necessarily documented in that regard. And just to note, under policy 2, it does mention with regards to the tree management, taking into account the ecological or community benefit. From the aspect of the hazard trees, I'm sure our insurance providers like the idea of the documentation of the policy. I do have a question though in relation to policy number 3, where it makes mention will respond to tree concerns within 5 business days. And Mr. Farquhar possibly can answer this. I'm assuming that's just an acknowledgement of the notification or complaint, not necessarily a commitment to action within that 5 business days.
Mr. Farquhar.
Madam Chair, that is absolutely correct. We want to make sure that prudent decisions ultimately are made, and it may take more than 5 days to come up with an appropriate resolve to deal with the issue brought to our attention. But it's really about acknowledging that it's been brought to our attention within 5 business days.
Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize Director Acton and then Director Kuhn following. Director Acton and Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if the recommendation has been moved, and I would move it if it has not.
It's been moved. It's been moved and seconded. Thank you. And I just have 2 more speakers on the speakers list. I have Director Kuhn.
Yes, I wonder if we are not getting too involved in micromanaging here. I have a lot of faith in our Parks and Trades Department. I think they're doing an excellent job. For us to go out and assess individual trees, and if a tree is under stress, well, if a tree is under stress, what are we going to do about it? If there's a tree under stress because of climate change, well, it's going to die. There is not much we can do. Or do you want to have an individual sprinkler system set up for that one tree? I mean, let's get away from micromanaging here. I think this is ridiculous.
So the last speaker that I have is back to Director Smith. Recognize Director Smith.
Thank you. One of the things that I noticed is not in the policy is the utilization of the trees that have been cut. I know during the wind blowdown, the town of Ladysmith took the blowdown trees and utilized them, making split rail fences to put back into their parks. And so there's maybe some possibility of revenue. Tree is cut down. It seems that the contractor bucks it up and then takes it out, and it becomes somebody's firewood, which is of value and has a money revenue towards it. So we need to have a look at where we can utilize the blowdowns or trees that may need to be cut down, and how we can capture that revenue from those. There's small mills that have practices that will come in and actually pull out some of the wood in a very eco-sensitive manner. One of the things I have a question of Mr. Farquhar is, are there any qualified arborists on the CVRD Parks and Trails staff?
Mr. Farquhar.
Madam Chair, yes, a few of our staff have gone through the appropriate level 1 training for hazard tree assessment and are qualified at that level. And so they will initially do the preliminary assessment, and depending on the nature and condition of the tree or trees of concern, we will also bring in a certified arborist separately to also assess and either reaffirm or provide additional information with respect to the condition of the trees.
Director Smith, a follow-up?
Follow-up. So in the policy, there was nothing indicating the utilization of the trees that are cut down and any type of revenue. Is there any possibility of that being put into the policy? And I was also concerned a bit about the fire hazards. I'm not sure that in the policy the fire hazards are addressed to protect the parks and trails and also the surrounding neighbors.
Mr. Farquhar?
Madam Chair, with respect to looking at trees on a revenue basis, the general practice has been, where possible, to leave trees that are brought down within the park, especially in the more forested areas, because of the ongoing habitat value and the provision of the nutrients and everything else as that tree breaks down back into that forest environment. Where we have had, however, trees that have been removed next to places like parking lots, we have also looked at cost recovery in terms of those trees being absolutely removed from the park, because they provide otherwise impact issues in terms of laying them down in a parking area. With respect to fire and risk management, that is certainly something that is taken into consideration when trees are removed or taken down in a park area, and we will continue to look at doing that. We can certainly look at the overall policy, and if there's something that needs to be tweaked or changed in identifying that, we can bring that back for the committee to further consider, or either to amend the existing policy as is, or further update at a later date.
Thank you so much. Ms. Legault, could you please read the recommendation for us, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the Parks and Trails tree management policy be approved.
So I call the question. All in favor? Unanimous? Or is opposed? If opposed, if any? Unanimous. Thank you so much. That has been moved. Is there follow-up, Director Smith? I recognize Director Smith.
Thank you. While we're on this topic, I'd like to make a recommendation that staff prepare a forest management plan for the board to review, as the policy is basically one tree at a time, and I would like to see a forest management policy or plan put in place. So I recommend staff prepare a forest management plan for review by the board.
I do not see a seconder, and I turn to, there has been no seconder. I turn to Director Morrison. Oh, Director Acton? Did you have
If there's no seconder, I'm fine. I would not second that motion.
Okay, and so, okay, we're good. So your motion has not gone anywhere, Director Smith, sorry. Moving on now to R3. A report and PowerPoint presentation from our Economic Development Division to update on the economic development and Cowichan activities. And I will now recognize Mr. O'Riordan, I believe, is going to be joining us. And welcome. I don't hear Mr. O'Riordan, but I see his PowerPoint.
There we are. Hello, and thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Thank you. So just give me 1 second here. I'm just getting my screen set up.
I just wanted to know, Mr. O'Riordan, do I have to switch anything over to you as host?
I think if you can see my screen, then we should be good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're all good?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, great. So, yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Today I will present to you an update on the activities of Economic Development Cowichan. Just waiting for my screen to react here. There we go. So the update topics include looking back at our strategic plan, looking back at some key activities, where we are going, so the work we're currently working on, what we're looking at next, and how we will measure success. So the EDC strategic plan for 2018 to 22 has 5 main elements: the business retention, expansion, and attraction, sector development, strengthening communities, communicating our story, and alignment with CBRD strategic activities. Looking back on EDC work up to this point will give us some context on the work ahead. In 2017, EDC conducted the Couch and Tech Strategy, which forms the basis for a lot of the work that we're doing right now. Moving on to 2019-20, we conducted an Industrial Land Use Strategy, again, a key document from which we'll base our activities. An air transport study. We worked on a heritage symposium, the Island Agriculture Show in February of 2020, and we just completed work fairly recently on the Shawnigan Lake Design Charrette. So next we're going to look at what EDC is currently working on. EDC is working on a number of initiatives stemming from the Couch and Tech Strategy. The Couch and Tech Strategy outlined a number of ways that we can build the tech ecosystem within the Cowichan Valley, and it's one of the key ways that of growth sectors that we can move towards strengthening the move towards higher paid wages and jobs within the region. As part of that, one of the key initiatives that we're working towards within that is the Cowichan Tech Training Initiative. So we're working with VIU and other partners on an initiative aimed at establishing a tech training program at the VIU campus in Cowichan. So this initiative speaks to the fact that we do have a lot of people moving to the Cowichan region as remote workers and working in tech, and this is growing, and that can be a benefit to the regional economy in a number of ways. But for the people who have grown up in Cowichan and are living here, there's a chance to leverage the experience and skills of those who've moved to Cowichan by providing employment opportunities for the people who have lived and grown up here. So yeah, this initiative, if we can get it to completion stage, would be a major win for the region, and we're working hard with our partners on this at the moment. Another aspect of this ecosystem building is tech networking, so looking to bring together those who are working in the tech sector who tend to be quite isolated, and bring them together around tech networking events, and also bring them together to try to spur innovation within the tech sector, startups, etc. This program was meant to be happening actually tomorrow and the next day, but it's been put on hold for the moment, given the current circumstances, and we're looking at ways how to revise that. Innovation Island is actually working on an island-wide, except for Greater Victoria area, project at the moment to help transition businesses who would like to engage more with, or to start to engage with the digital economy. So perhaps there's ways to pivot what we were already doing to leverage on that. Another initiative is working with our regional partners and VICI, the Vancouver Island Coastal Economic Developers Association, on a regional tech attraction website, which is near the launch stage. So that would highlight our community and the benefits of our community for tech companies to establish here. So that is that. A second here. Oh, I just got to go back.
And I'll just maybe let the committee know that I will take the questions after, and you can press the button if you want to be in queue, and I can see that your hand is being raised, and I'll put you on the list for speaking after the presentation. Thank you.
So within agriculture and value added, EDC is partnered with the Small Scale Food Processors Association on a food processing study aimed at understanding the demand for local foods within an institutional environment, as well as sketching out the infrastructure, equipment, and operational model suitable for a food processing hub in the Cowichan context. This study is in its draft form right now, so we're hoping to release the findings of this study in the near future. And the eventual aim of this, besides the understanding of what the institutional context is, to build a framework for having a Cowichan food processing hub. So at the same time, we're working with Cowichan Green Community and others on how to operationalize that on the ground and leverage funding around that. So this is a long-term project that that we'll be continuing to work on. And so also we're working with the BC Young Agrarians on a land match program. This program, the Young Agrarians will be looking to present to committee in due course once delegations are being accepted for regional service. So they'll be able to provide a more in-depth update on that fairly soon, I hope. The Island Agriculture Show is scheduled to take place in Cowichan again in 2021, following on from the success of the 2020 show, again pending any outcomes of the COVID-19 situation. In film, EDC continues to support film in Cowichan through the work of our film liaison, and filming activities have contributed millions to the regional economy in the past year. While activities are currently on hold, there is some optimism that when filming activities return to BC and Cowichan, we may be well poised to benefit from that, hopefully being open earlier than other jurisdictions. We also have been working to support economic development through working with our regional partners. For example, our sub-regional partners, working actively currently with Ladysmith, and we have been with Shawnigan on their initiatives. And I can speak to this more in a subsequent report. With regard to First Nations, EDC has been actively working to build collaborative relationships with our First Nations economic development professionals, and will continue to do so. EDC also sits on the board representing the CDRD in Tourism Cowichan Society, as well as Duncan Cowichan Chamber of Commerce. We've also been supporting our nonprofits to build their capacity to support economic development in a myriad of ways. Some projects include working on the Heritage Symposium recently, working with arts and cultural organizations, as well as community groups. So what's next? Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has taken over all our lives in this past month, as we can see by our video conference call here. EDC has taken a proactive approach to this health and economic crisis, working on a number of fronts, seeking to respond incrementally, collaboratively, and effectively as the crisis continues to evolve. EDC staff have been positioned within the Advanced Planning Unit of the Regional Emergency Operations Centre, the REOC, to work with the team there on advanced planning for economic recovery. At this stage, the indication is that the REOC is the right place to plan and resource economic recovery efforts on the regional level, and will be continued to assess that situation and where the province will be directing their resources. But at this stage, it looks like the indications are that they will be delivering that aid and resources through the REOC. At the same time, outside of the REOC, EDC has been working collaboratively with outside organizations on a number of emerging initiatives to respond to the crisis. Examples include a business resource initiative known as Cowichan Strong, which is in collaboration with Duncan Cowichan Chamber of Commerce and the Community Futures Cowichan, as well as a number of additional partnerships are in the works. A buy local initiative, which is just getting underway with Tourism Cowichan and BIAs and other partners, and other projects that are in the early development stage, such as the Food Security Initiative. All these initiatives require resourcing to make them effective, which is why the recommendation has been made to amend the 2020 budget as part of this report. Staff will be working to ensure that the EDC specific initiatives, as well as the REOC, align and are mutually reinforcing when it comes to economic recovery. And we're still figuring out how best to play that out. So in the meantime, EDC has been working both inside the REOC and out. And I'm sure we'll have some questions and discussion on that a bit later. In terms of what's next outside of the current global pandemic, which is all consuming. So in terms of the tech strategy implementation, we'll continue to work on all the projects that we're currently working on. But we'll also be looking to implement other recommendations stemming from the Couch and Tech strategy, including looking at what can be done in terms of internet connectivity. I see Director Nicholson has got a blurry image there. I'm sure that's a result of poor connection speeds, but there are others throughout the region who are experiencing similar difficulties. So that's something that we'll be spending some time on. Also, we'll be looking to spur innovation and entrepreneurship within tech. So as part of building that whole ecosystem, innovation is a key component. Within agriculture, once this food processing feasibility study has completed, we'll be at the direction of the board looking to implement the findings and the recommendations stemming from that study, with the eventual aim of establishing a food processing hub as well as supporting agriculture in other ways. Also, which is relevant to the current global pandemic and the potential loss of a number of restaurants and businesses in the area, will be looking to support entrepreneurship in food processing, agriculture, and within restaurant and the restaurant side of things. Within cannabis, there is, from the discussions that were had at the Island Ag Show in 2020, it became clear that cannabis has been and continues to be a major important part of the regional economy. Its potential that there could be several thousand people working in the cannabis industry in Cowichan, although those numbers have not been verified. So there's a chance to look at cannabis to support the existing industries who may be in the gray market to transition to the legal market, and support those who are working in it who the indications are that they would be more vulnerable populations. So there also would be opportunities within cannabis to potentially support food security, as well as other potential opportunities within tourism sector. We will be investigating those as the time permits. The industrial land use strategy, published in 2019, will be continuing to look to implement that through continued sector development, as well as participation and guidance to the modernized OCP process. What's next coming up also would be supporting sub-regional strategy and design charrette support, which we'll speak to in a further report. But existing design charrettes or sub-regional strategies in Shawnigan, Ladysmith, Cow Bay, Cobble Hill, and Lake Cowichan, and others will be resourced as requested and to the staffing ability of EDC. With regard to First Nations, we're looking to further strengthen our communications with our First Nation partners, align our focus, and build partnerships with our First Nation community, particularly working with our economic development professionals within that field. So we'll be continuing to do work on that. The accommodation strategy looks at the long-range needs and partnership opportunities for built accommodation within Cowichan. Given the present circumstances, this project is under review as we determine the right timing and appropriate resources to assign to the project. As you know, the accommodation sector has got some concern. Director Kuhn, would you like to speak right now, or are you putting your hand up for later?
No, and I'll speak later. That's fine. Thanks. I just wanted to raise my hand.
I've got you on the list, Director Kuhn.
Okay. So yeah, given the current circumstances of the accommodation sector, we have not moved forward at this time with progressing the accommodation strategy, but we will be reviewing how things are progressing and looking to restart that as soon as it makes sense to do so. And the next point would be to inspire innovation. So acknowledging that conflict does exist between the business community and the environmental movement, we need to move towards a shared future where business and ecology can coexist and thrive together. There are already tools out there that can shape this future, and now is the time to share these tools with the business community and entrepreneurs to drive sustainable and resilient innovation in Cowichan. So that's another activity that we'd be looking to do, which would be to guide and to break down these distance between the environmental movement and the business community. Any change that has happened within society has happened. It has happened with business and often directed by business. So the more we can support our business community to support the transition to a sustainable and resilient regional economy, the better. So how will we measure success in 2020? We'll measure success based on our action on recommendations of tech, industrial land use, food processing, and other studies and strategies, our response to communications and outreach, and actions in response to COVID-19 crisis. And that's all I have for you today. And open up to any questions.
Ready for some questions. Yes, could I have your panel removed? And then I can have everybody's hands. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I do have a bit of a speakers list. I have Director Wilson, Director Justice, and Director Kuhn, and a lot of people I think I missed. Director Morrison, Acton, and Director Haynes. Director Wilson. I recognize Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Barry. I'm glad to see that there's a lot of planning going on as far as mitigation of the present crisis is concerned. And I've been hearing an awful lot on the possibility of many local businesses not making it through this, and I'm pleased to see that you're looking at ways of mitigating a lot of that. I've been, as you know, working with you and with high-tech companies from the mainland, and one of the biggest problems that we've got is a lack of location from the for down here in the south. And one of the other sectors, of course, and you have mentioned it, is the lack of good communications. I mean, we've only got one provider down here. And that's Shaw, which has been very good. But have you been talking with TELUS? Every time I talk with them, they say, well, you know, we've got to get a return and it's rural, etc. What are we doing as far as bringing in alternates and providers such as TELUS to bring in their network? And that's about it from my end. Thank you.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Great question. So I think the need to understand the regional situation in terms of broadband and connectivity is a starting point for these discussions. So if we conduct a study to assess what our current network situation is and what other jurisdictions have done is they've gone community by community to assess what people are looking to do with the technology and where the gaps lie, then a strategy can be developed from that to support the activities to make those needs and visions a reality. So that's the approach that other communities have done. There is, under the federal rules, there's a 50/10 download speed, which now I understand is what is considered a right. And within the next number of years, the intention is that everyone should be able to receive 50 megabytes per second download and 10 megabits per second upload speeds. There hasn't been huge progress in making that happen, and it's been a bit of a patchwork approach. But there are a number, I think now would be a key time for us to start moving on this to develop a broadband strategy so we know where we're at, then we can work to fill those gaps. And the other aspect is resiliency. So if you do have one service provider and there's not a second one and there's no second artery to get you that information, that if one breaks, now that you're at risk that your whole area is cut off. So I think broadband connectivity and connectivity in general is now considered, basic infrastructure like roads, and that if you don't have connections between these roads and if you don't have enough roads to get people where they need to go, then it's gonna affect you now, or if an emergency situation occurs, that one of your lines of communication or transport, in this case telecommunications, gets knocked out. So yeah, that's where I would
Thanks. I have a follow-up, Director Wilson. Do you have a follow-up to that question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, have you actually talked to TELUS or anyone though, Barry? It sure has been very good. I mean, I've got 300 megabits per second, which is more than I need, but the high-tech companies are looking for 1 gig and above because they've got huge broadband needs. Sure can't supply that right now where we are. So are we actually talking with TELUS to say, what's your plans for this area, or even the other area?
I haven't talked directly with TELUS since I've started in this role, but I know my predecessor had done, and they don't seem very interested in other people telling them what to do. They say we'll make our own business. This is what I've been told, that they've come back and said, well, thanks very much. We'll make our own business decisions, and those decisions may be based upon wanting to sell you Netflix as opposed to supporting tech companies to be there. So that kind of underlies why it would be a need to have a strategy in place to go, okay, what are the gaps there? And if TELUS isn't able to provide those, then how else do we do that? Do we support the development of our own broadband communications here, support other companies to be set up to fill those gaps, etc. And the other point is around this is that there is funding coming down the line, and if we have a strategy in place, we'll be much better placed to be able to activate on that. There also is the Coastal Connectivity Project, if I'm remembering the name correctly, which is looking to drop fiber optic cable all around Vancouver Island and Sunshine Coast, which should be in place by 21 or 22. And this will drop fiber optic cables to drop points all around the island, but it does not create the last line connectivity. So if we have one, a strategy in place, and two, it lines up to this this huge level of connectivity that's possible, then it would position us well to be able to act on that.
Okay, thank you. I now have I recognize Director Justice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Riordan. With respect to the Economic Development Coalition's response to COVID-19, have you got any plans to systematically monitor the effect that this is having and will have on the local economy? I mean, obviously the economy is going to take a hit. We don't know how big it's going to be, how long it's going to last. We don't know which sectors are going to be differentially affected. So my question is, what are we doing to systematically monitor the effect that this is and will have on the local economy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that can be answered on a number of levels. So the level of information can be brought in on a number of scales. So the BC Chamber and the BC ECA, the Economic Developers Association, have combined on the BC Mindreader platform to do bi-weekly surveys of the business community. That gives an overall impression of what's happening island-wide. Doesn't necessarily break that information down within Cowichan, but the effects have been felt similarly throughout the regions on Vancouver Island. Also, other industry associations have been doing their own studies, and we're looking to gather information from those. But on a local level, we do need to get that in. We do need to get that more localized information so we can understand how we can approach this on a more regional level. So part of the partnership that we're developing with the Duncan Cowichan Chamber of Commerce and Community Teachers Cowichan Strong has got a resource website which is looking to gather some of that information regarding any survey that we develop would be sent out to all the members of the chambers and the broader business community to try and get more localized information. We have not conducted any of these surveys to date, but that's something that is in the works within our planning stages around that. Also potentially within the REOC, something similar will be done. So gathering this information from a multitude of sources, be it industry associations, Tourism Cowichan, the Restaurants Association, as well as the BC Chamber, as well as gathering information on a local level. We'll be looking to develop a fulsome picture of what the economic situation is, as well as the needs of our local business community in order to move forward.
Thank you.
We'll also be conducting webinars and other ways to communicate with the business community so that we can get more anecdotal one-on-one conversations with the business community.
Thank you. I recognize Director Kuhn.
Yes, I would like to just make a few comments with regard to charrettes. Charrettes, from what I've observed, and we had a charrette in Yubo, I think some 12 years ago or so. They're quite good in getting people together and getting ideas out and getting everybody excited about what the possibilities are. There's a big downfall to that, though, from what my experience showed, and that is there's a big difference between what the people are expecting and what they want and what they're willing to finance. And quite often the charrettes fail when it comes to the implementation of the funding, unless there's a government grant available, and even with a government grant, there has to be money inserted by the region. So I want to just caution. I've observed charrettes where all kinds of great ideas came forward, and you look at years later as to what actually has been materialized, and there were maybe minor changes made, and the rest was just not possible because the financing wasn't there. The individuals or the residents were just not willing to put up the funding. So that's my comment about charrettes. Generally, they're quite good, but to spend an awful lot of money on a charrette, I just can't see the purpose.
Thank you. We will follow now to, I recognize Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to congratulate Mr. O'Riordan on his report. It seems to be a very ambitious work plan that you have ahead of you, and appreciate your dedication. I don't know that all of those items are achievable, but given the very small department that you lead, but it's very aspirational, all the work that's being done. I'll be brief, and I'd like if you could put me back on the list. I've just got a couple of points, and then I will come back to comments about charrettes. I'd like to just encourage Mr. O'Riordan to participate in some of the other Chamber of Commerce activities that are going on. You've mentioned the North Cowichan Duncan Chamber a couple of times. I know that the Lake Cowichan Chamber has some very significant work and challenges and initiatives that I'd like to perhaps maybe see you at one of their events. Likewise with our Ladysmith folks and folks in the South End, if they're busy. COVID-19 recovery. I'm just wondering how you're doing as far as pursuing funding going for recovery and the next steps, and when we begin to open up, and if you've got anything to report on other funding opportunities for ECDEV. I know ICE-T is always a possibility for areas looking to do different projects, and I'll come back to my other comments when you come back to me. If Mr. O'Riordan could address those two things.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the other chambers, and it's a good point. Within this project, which is Cowichan Strong, the initiative is just begun by the Economic Development Cowichan and Community Futures Cowichan, as well as the Duncan Cowichan Chamber. But we will be extending discussions with the other chambers to hopefully bring them into that program, and I will be communicating with them around these activities. And I have been working with some of the other chambers, but we'll be looking to bridge some of those gaps if there are some. So thank you for that. Regarding funding for initiatives stemming out of this crisis, so far we have not written any grant proposals around this. Right now we're resourcing it with what we have, and the purpose of the staff report would be to move around some funds within the Economic Development Cowichan, so we can start to move forward on initiatives that can be done at a relatively low cost, yet still having impact. And then as we move through this, then we will be assessing what sources of funding will be out there to support us. And as I said, it's envisioned that some of this funding, or maybe a lot of it, can be brought through the provincial emergency management or emergency operations center as they move to a recovery phase, and there's some indication that that's how things will play out. Other people in the developing community have said opposingly that because this is moving so slow, that the provincial government is happy to work with each provincial organization. So agriculture would be under ag, and economic development would be under jobs and tourism or jobs trade. So we still need to see what the province is going to do in terms of financing programs moving forward. But ICE-T is certainly one that is open to ongoing applications. The Rural Dividend Program was shut down, as you know, last year. Maybe that will be reactivated based on this. But there's also other innovation funding, depending on what project you're going on. There's numerous federal and provincial funding sources out there that different projects would be looking to leverage. So that's as much as I can say on this for now.
I recognize Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to comment on your focus category of inspiring innovation through connecting the businesses with ecology. I thought that's a really interesting and important opportunity, especially right now with COVID-19, and how are we going to rebuild our economy in certain areas, as you mentioned. And I appreciate all your comments around supporting local business and the restaurant sectors, because I know we are really struggling here with that in our local business community. As for charrettes, I didn't want to react to Director Kuhn's comments, but I just want to add to his comment. Now with EDC adds the additional opportunity to succeed, and that's where they can support the charrettes with getting funding and grant funding. And it's unfortunate that UBU did not have that opportunity 12 years ago, but it's also important that the community is very on side with the charrette. As in our next presentation, perhaps Mr. O'Riordan will talk more about it, but the community in Shawnigan Lake was really strong, and it was backed by the community every step of the way. And then it's also important that the director also supports the charrette. So anyway, yes, and to Director Morrison's points, Mr. O'Riordan, it's very large goals for you, and I hope that it appears that maybe perhaps you should have asked for more than one person to hire, but we're behind you all the way. So thanks for all the good work that you're doing.
So Director Acton, was there a question in there at the beginning for Mr. O'Riordan? Or just comment?
I am interested in hearing more about the businesses connecting with ecology as for the green economy, but I can leave it for another day as this conversation is starting to really expand. So up to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I could move on, if you feel a need, because I do believe that Mr. O'Riordan had said that he was going to follow up on charrettes, et cetera, on another report, if I understood it correctly. Alternate Director Haim, I recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Economic development for me is one of those ones that quite often the results can be quite anecdotal. It potentially is an area where unlimited money could get thrown into it under the guise of what appears to be good projects. Not only that, everybody takes credit for the successes. Although again, quite often the benefits are anecdotal. Specific questions. So for using the food processing strategy as an example, is there an expectation that as part of the strategy, there will be identification of metrics where the benefits themselves can be measured not only on a broader regional basis, but also relatively accurately tied to the individual electoral areas in that? And I'm recognizing Area H with its history and capacity related to agriculture. And then a second question, going to one of your slides where you mentioned in terms of your successes would be the measure of action on your various strategy or acting on the strategy recommendations in this year. Recognizing the disruption within our economy and realistically an expectation of focus on COVID-19 and business success and or business survival, let alone growth and that sort of thing. Is that really realistic as a goal or a measure of success for this year? Or is it going to be one of those ones where we didn't get to it this year, maybe next year? I just worry about being too broad focused and therefore in that respect, not necessarily successful. So two questions, one in relation to metrics on the plan, food processing strategy as the example, and the second one with regards to the measure of success for this year.
Mr. O'Riordan, and microphone off, Director Haim.
Thank you. Excellent questions. In terms of the food processing study, I think we need to wait for that processing study to be finalized in order to be able to fully comment on that. Sorry to put that one off, but yeah, let's wait for the final report to come out and look at the recommendations stemming from that, and then see and then I can respond more clearly to your question. And in terms of the question on working on the strategy recommendations, I see this crisis as definitely a turning point for the regional economy, and yes, we are directing efforts in other ways other than what has been the established work plan for EDC, and considerable resources and time have been put in to respond and react to the crisis. The way I see it unfolding is that yes, we will need to continue to respond to the crisis and focus our efforts around that. But at the same time, a lot of the work that we had been doing up to now and is on our work plan is relevant to a response and makes it equally urgent to act on the initiatives that we currently have in play. For example, the tech strategy. The more projects that we have that we can keep moving, maybe they won't be moving as quick as they would have been otherwise. At the start of this, for example, we started a tech survey of all the tech companies in the Cowichan region, and we got half of those surveys out to people, and then boom, our world changed, and we pressed pause. But slowly we've been getting back to that and going, okay, well, we need to move this forward, because if funding does get announced, we want as many projects which are relevant to responding to this crisis, shovel ready, as it were, as possible, so that we can move forward in a coherent way. So the activities that we're doing in a lot of ways should be acting coherently with what our response will be to this crisis, and we'll be adjusting and tailoring our existing work plan and strategies to align with the recovery strategy and building upon them.
Thank you. I have a follow-up from Director Haim. I'm just confirming that I have on my speakers list Director Stone, Staples, and Morrison for one more time. So I do have those ones, and now I do have Director Sebring as well. And remembering that we do have a recommendation, and I have Sebring and Nicholson. So I move now, alternate Director Haim, you had a follow-up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in relation to that, recognizing, yes, there may be funding coming from other levels of government, as an example. Quite often it's expecting an investment from us as well. So do you anticipate additional resources needed to be reallocated beyond, say, just the recommendation today in order to achieve that and in order to leverage that money?
What I'd say to that is that through the REOC, there will be definitely a need to resource actions to respond to this crisis, in both terms of health and community, as well as economics. I'm not sure if those requests will come through the Economic Development Office or they'll come through REOC. But this is a huge crisis which will affect all levels of government and potentially tax bases. So the need to respond effectively is critical. And but yeah, do I think 30,000 is enough to respond to this crisis? If that's your question, I would say no. But this is what we're requesting now in order to be able to start some of these micro actions to be able to move forward in some sort of coherent way with some guidance and backing of the board.
Thank you. And I'd just like to make a comment on the food processing. I know that is something that we have been talking about for years in the Area D official community plan as well. So it has been on the books for a long time, and it looks like this crisis is going to move a lot of food security issues a little faster than it would have normally. I turn now to recognize Director Stone.
Sorry about that. So yeah, just a couple quick notes. I just want to, I think it's been highlighted already, the importance of economic development to not only the sort of this crisis management, but also further to the recovery efforts. So the more preparation we do in advance, the more we engage with our business community and with our senior government partners, the better off we'll be in terms of recovery planning and then recovery actions. The tech conversation around connectivity, that's been front and center for quite some time. During the tech strategy, we did have conversations with TELUS specifically and Shaw. I've had continuing conversations actually most recently with Shaw about some of the last mile issues out in Director Nicholson's area, for example, and federal and provincial funding opportunities to help cover those last mile, especially in sort of more urban, rural areas like we have, where we're considered very rural, not a lot of customers on the line, but possibly some high value customers. And there is a lot of infrastructure tied to, I hate to even say the words, but 5G deployment. Because those 5G infrastructure will require fiber connections. As 5G spreads throughout more rural areas, fiber will come with those infrastructure pieces. So that's important to note that a lot of fiber from TELUS and other providers will come with 5G deployment. And I think just regarding charrettes in general, the expectation needs to be set during charrette processes of the high cost of actually implementing some of these things and what is going to be, sort of taxation or local government responsibility, grant funding opportunities, and also private sector investment. So when we go into these processes, if we understand that, like in the Ladysmith charrette, I think we've probably dedicated about $1 million over 3 years to all of the work that's required, and then getting the matching funds from senior government for the specific projects that are public within those charrette areas, and then bringing the private sector in to fill what gaps there may be for private enterprise. So it's just important to really set those expectations. And I think, speaking to Director Coon's point, those are the lessons we've learned over the last decade going through these processes. So the more we're making our local residents mindful of the implications of these charrettes, what the actual executions look like and the costs associated. Hopefully you can use the charrette to get some buy-in for those costs. And then also the resulting opportunities that come back through those investments. I don't like to look at them as just spending, but they're actually investments that should provide a return on investment. And that speaks to Director Hames' comment about some of the metrics. Like at ICE-T, every project that comes forward has an analysis that says job creation during construction, long-term jobs, and then we continue to test those metrics over time. So it would be smart for us to continue to leverage our relationship with ICE-T to employ some of those metrics as well. Now, again, it does, as Director Hames also alluded to, require somebody else to do that economic analysis, because you need that sort of arm's length arrangement so that you can have sort of a fresh set of eyes on different projects and look at the relative values of it. And then track back on them and see if they achieve those metrics. So there's definitely a lot we can do, but I really do want to appreciate the work that you're doing, Mr. O'Riordan, and the entire team. And by that, I mean the larger group of associations, VICETA, BCETA, VIA, Innovation Island, ICE-T, EDC Couch, and all the chambers, all the BIAs. I don't think I've seen as much engagement between them. And then again, just extending from our efforts up here, and I know we say Ladysmith, but they are truly partnerships. We have Community Futures, First Nations, all at that sort of table, so we can continue to sort of apply that model throughout the region and hopefully maximize our shared success. So I just want to appreciate the work, and thanks. And
thank you. Thank you, Director Stone. I now recognize Director Staples. Director Staples. Microphone, please.
Oh, okay. I've got it now. Sorry. It was okay. So yeah, thanks very much for the update and for all the work that you've been doing on this. It's really appreciated, and I just want to acknowledge too that the partnerships being such a key part to all of this, and how quickly you work to develop those. And so just thank you for that on behalf of all of us, and also the connection that you're making between ecology and economy moving forward. I mean, I think that that's key, and that's what we're hearing over and over again from people, particularly around food security. And in terms of the technical sort of pieces of it, I'm wondering, has there been any connection made with the school district or the or education around around that technology, because of the need for homeschooling or to be happening at different places? They're also having those same struggles. So has there been a connection made to try to engage on maybe two different fronts on bringing technology to the more rural places in the region that still need to be properly connected?
Mr. O'Riordan.
That's some great points and questions. In terms of the school district, maybe 2 points on that. One would be within an overall custom tech strategy. If we were to engage with one, with direction from the board on that, then the school district would definitely be part of that, because that would shape where they would be potentially locating schools or dropping fiber, or to assess the needs of where connectivity would be needed. Also related to the new hospital that's underway, and how connectivity can be done around that. In other ways, and I haven't connected with the school district directly in relation to their current struggles in terms of connectivity, but yeah, there is an understanding that that the ability for students to be able to engage in online learning is going to be dependent, one, on their economic or socioeconomic situation, but also their internet connectivity. And I think it's something that I'm sure the school district is looking at, but maybe we all need to be aware of that. If connectivity is poor in some areas, then those people are now going to be additionally affected by the outcomes and the needs from COVID-19 and having to do remote working and from schooling. So it's not just where the wires are connected, but also who has access to them and their ability to pay for them. So they're all key issues. The other point in terms of working with the school district, Couchin new high school is being built, and I'll be working closely with them on how we can incorporate technology within that new campus. So this is outside the scope of distance learning, etc.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for Director Stables. Could your microphone be turned off, please? Thank you. And moving on to Director Morrison. I have Directors Morrison, Sebring, and Nicholson. Director Morrison, I recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just through to Mr. O'Riordan, a couple of quick things. You've heard and you made mention in your report about ecology and economy needing to work together, and I'm hoping that perhaps something could be spearheaded, because it's been noted in this meeting the number of folks are interested in that, and I've been noticing that in the past number of months the various groups have been sort of talking at or past each other, or not with each other, and as part of our HOCP, we're trying to get people to the table to work together, to collaborate. I think that's very important. Specifically, to change gears, in 08, when I was first elected, we were going through a huge economic crisis, and one of the things that our senior governments asked Canadian consumers to do was to spend our way out of that economic crisis. And one of the things that's going to be really important is consumer spending on the other side, or through this recovery. I just got some grief for purchasing some food products at a multinational company, and somebody suggested that I should be spending more of my dollars closer to home. And I agree, I'm a big supporter of shopping local and that sort of thing. But I think there's a fair bit of confusion out there. I think there's been proliferation of online purchasing that's been going on recently with the crisis, with everybody staying at home. And do we have any sort of initiative or pamphlet or program that gives local consumers an idea of where the best bang for their buck is if they're shopping locally? Yes, there's your local grocery store, your local pharmacy, but I think that we can be really effective in the dollars that we do spend if people have an idea where the best bang for their buck is when they are shopping locally, not just in a proximity, but throughout our region. So do we have any information, or can we produce something that will give our consumers the directions and suggestions as to how they can be most impactful when they go to spend their dollars, when they happen to venture outside of their homes for their necessities?
Mr. O'Riordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so this question, it speaks to what we're working on in terms of a buy local campaign. So we recently purchased a domain buylocalcouchin.ca, and working with currently the Duncan BIA and Tourism Couchin, as well as Couchin Discourse and the Citizen newspaper on, and it will be others on building that out and what it looks like in terms of starting a buy local campaign. So the initial part of that would be to create a local business directory, which would be a map, where a searchable map where you can locate what businesses are open, who's doing deliveries and pickups, etc.
Which we currently already have, but not in that detail, as the Cowichan Green community has been doing that map for quite a few years now.
Yeah, so there's a number of different tools out there around that, which have varying and lesser degrees of success. So this is one that, again, the power of partnerships, that if everyone gets behind one and markets it out to the local region and the consumers in the region, then we can start to drive people towards those businesses. And then as they reopen or increase their level of services, which there's some indication that more and more folks are starting to do as the provincial and federal funding becomes clear what's out there, then this will be one way to do that. And then the second way around that would be to start to figure out other ways within that to build out a support local or buy local first campaign. You see those memes on Facebook, etc., to go, okay, look for something on Amazon, find out the product, and then look where you can buy that locally. So there'll be a number of ways to do that, and working with our partners who are excellent in terms of marketing, such as Tourism Couchin and our BIAs, and then pushing out to local businesses through our Chamber of Commerce, etc., will be a good starting point for that. In terms of value for money, I think that speaks to competition. So I think having the greater number of businesses on these directories, and there is one more directory which is being established by Small Business BC /Marketplace, which is another one which is province-wide and actually goes within Canada. So if you want to support businesses throughout Canada, then it should have additional options within there. So I think as people become more aware of these opportunities, then that'll start to build out. And then on the other side, Innovation Island has a program working with, and they've just launched this, working with local tech companies and businesses that are looking to move their business online and to expand their business online, that they will be basically have a concierge service to analyze where people are at in terms of their digital skills, and then to try to bring them to the next level, whether that's bring them from a 0 to a 3 or from a 6 to a 10, depending where they're at in the scale. So I think that we will see a shift going through this of people moving to the digital economy, and with that shift, presumably they'll speak to the need for bang for buck as well, because people
Thank you.
do.
I recognize Director Morrison as his follow-up. I also recognize the time.
Very quickly, and it's great that we have the lists and the directories. I think that it's really important that people understand the impactfulness of investing and buying from home-based business, locally independently owned and operated businesses, and the impact as per each level of ownership.
Thank you. I recognize Director Sebring.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to completely change direction here for a minute, and I just want to make sure Mr. Riordan is aware of this. I received a letter, and I think a bunch of us mayors did the other day, from the Island Corridor Foundation, co-signed by the co-chairs, Judith Sayers and Phil Kent, appealing to the province to consider working with the feds in the context of the Economic Recovery Task Force that the province has set up, to see if there can be federal infrastructure money thrown at the Island Corridor specifically. I'm just going to quote a line from the letter. Given this is an existing corridor, it does not face the same regulatory, environmental, or land use issues that many similar infrastructure projects will have to overcome. The planning process has already been started with the completion of the corridor assessment recently undertaken by the province. This is indeed a shovel-ready project. I just wanted to make Mr. Riordan and the rest of the committee and board aware that there's an effort being made to put that back on the agenda, as well as something that we might be able to leverage in this time when there's obviously a need for some economic stimulus. I'll just leave it there. And I guess I would just ask, Barry, were you aware of this initiative?
Mr. Riordan?
No, I wasn't, and thank you for bringing it. If you can send me a copy of that, then I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I just forwarded the letter to the board as well on email, so you all have it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Turn off your microphone, please. And I have Director Nicholson. I recognize Director Nicholson. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great presentation and good discussion. I think I might add equality to the economy and ecology thing as something we need to strive for, given what we've learned through this COVID-19 pandemic. I am really thrilled that you're working on this connectivity issue, and I know the community out here and in a few other places in my area would be very pleased to hear that. We'd love a fiber connection, but I also need to remind you that we aren't so, there have been, some of the community has serious health concerns about 5G, so that's something to keep in mind. My question is about the industrial land use strategy, and how, could you clarify how we plan to collaborate? We've got an opportunity with the OCP modernization with all the electoral areas working together, but I'm wondering how we're going to collaborate with the munis on that.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Well, right now, in terms of the modernization process, yes, the current plans around implementing the industrial land use strategy is around the modernization process. So Economic Development Commission would be presenting to the OCP committee on that on May 6th. And that is as far as we've gone in the process. Other than that, right now we've been working in terms of that study and that strategy on looking at the sector development side. So that's as far as we are in that process right now. So I'm not sure I can speak to your other question at this time.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up, Director Nicholson?
Yeah, well, yes, maybe it's for the other board members to, particularly from the municipalities, to think about how we might. This will really only work if it's thought through regionally, and so we really need to think about how we can make that happen.
Good comments. And I now turn to, thank you, Director Nicholson. We'll turn to Ms. Legault with finally the recommendation. Could you please read it for us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation for consideration is that it be that the budget for Function 121 Economic Development be amended to 1. Add a new project line item, Business Retention, Expansion, Attraction, and Resilience, and an increase of $30,000 to this new line item. 2. Reduce wages expenses by $21,600. And 3. Reduce benefits expense by $8,400.
Okay, do I have a mover? It's been moved and that's been seconded. I'm going to call the question. Alternate Director Hain, would you like to speak before I call the question?
Yes, if I could, please. I'm challenged with item 1 within the recommendation, recognizing that it's calling the line item Business Retention, Expansion, Attraction, and Resilience. The nature of the report identifies it specific to the COVID-19 or the reallocation of funds specific to COVID-19, and recognizing the function itself is about business retention, expansion, attraction, and resilience. As a title for the function, sure. As a title for a funding line item that's specifically directed, I'm challenged with that. So I move an amendment to item 1 to add the term COVID-19 before the words business retention.
So there's an amendment. Is there anybody seconding that? It's been seconded by Director Wilson. So on the amendment, please. So it's to add the COVID-19 before business retention. So discussion. All in. Want to be clear? I'm just slowing down here a little bit because this is a little. So we right now have the discussion on the amendment. Seeing no hands up, I will call the question. All in favor of the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, now hands went up and down. Can you just hold them up for me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's moved. It's passed. Opposed, if any? Well, you'll know. Okay. And so you now have on the original motion. So we have the amendment. So they will vote on the motion as amended. All in favor? Opposed, if any? So there's 2 opposed. Motion is carried. Can we take a 5-minute break? Is that okay to recommend at the moment? Because we have almost been almost 2 hours. So 5 minutes, please, and come back. Grab your coffee. Thank you.
So if you were just going to start the meeting again and give us about 15 seconds.
You can hear me, Angie?
I can hear you just fine.
Thank you.
We're good to go.
Welcome back. Thank you so much. We're moving on now to the report number 4. I believe it's Mr. O'Riordan again that will be presenting, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay.
So this report is for information. Following the completion of the Shawnigan Lake design charrette, I think Shawnigan, as well as we have a number of other design charrettes under our belt as a regional district. And it's worth clarifying the extent to which EDC staff will be able to participate and support the implementation of these design charrettes. And this is in recognition of some of the comments Director Kuhn and Director Acton had earlier on around how these can be supported and completed. And so your comments rightly, maybe regarding U-Bahn, I haven't seen the design charrette there, Director Kuhn, where that maybe it didn't move along so far in terms of the hope and expectation that arised out of the vision for the community. And the recognition, as Director Stone pointed out, is that we have learned through the process of going through these design charrettes that in order for them to be truly effective, they need to be grounded in the community and have the support of the community and local organizations. Also, to be effective, they do need some sort of participation and support from the CBRD and appropriately through the Economic Development Office. So the understanding is that there's some major factors that contribute to the success of these, and one is the perceived community ownership of these design charrettes. The other is the elected officials' interest in moving forward with these plans and support of them and their involvement in them, perhaps. And then the capacity of the organizations that are involved in them to self-organize to move it forward, but also to be able to come to the CBRD for technical guidance. And the nature of these design charrettes is that they cross multiple jurisdictions. So that's where Economic Development Council can come in, is that if the community has an interest in moving forward with the design charrettes that they do have, and they have some sort of base to work around that, and they want to move forward with them, then EDC can play a supporting role to connect to the other, to the provincial government or MOTI or other departments within the CBRD, so that there is those connections in place. And so this report is just highlighting that EDC could participate in those ways in more high-level way, that we would not be the one running those committees. We would not be doing all that work. And I think that's been the past perception in one or two of these design charrettes that are going to look to local government to go, okay, what are you going to do to implement this for us? But whereas we're seeing the more appropriate response would be, okay, how can we do this together, and what role will local government take within that to support these actions? So that's essentially what this report is outlining.
Thank you. Seeing no hands up, I recognize Director Smith.
Thank you very much. I think that it's amazing that these charrettes have taken place over time, and some of the communities, the designs are definitely awesome, and they make all of us get pretty excited when we see them. One of the things I'd like to know is how much staff time has been recorded for each of these charrettes, so that there's a sort of a correlation between economic development, the staff time involved in the charrette, and then staff time involved in the follow-up on the charrette. Can you please indicate how that's recorded and what statistics you have on that?
Thank you. Mr. O'Riordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To speak to that, I don't have specific data on the time that has been, the staff time that's been put into each of these design charrettes. Of course, in the implementation stage of these design charrettes, there have been additional staff resources put behind them in order to, in the project planning and implementation stage. And I would just say that the purpose of this report is to create clarity on the limitations of staff to be able to spend a huge amount of time in managing the projects when they get to the completion stage. So if EDC is given direction by the board to support a design charrette initiative, then those resources would be put there as needed to help support the community to to create the charrettes. And then after they're completed and with the right processes in place, this gives guidance on how staff time can be allocated in a fair and appropriate manner to implement them after the fact. So that it speaks to staff not spending a huge amount of time understanding that there are many design charrettes and there are many other regional objectives. These certainly fit into those regional objectives, but they cannot be the core work of the principal work of EDC, and this seeks to clarify that.
I recognize Director Moore. Follow up, Director Smith. Follow up.
Yes, so with the COVID-19 recovery and the discussion that just took place with the earlier item on the agenda, it would appear that the recovery and some of the directions that you're going in that report it shows that the charrettes will not have priority in that list in the recovery. And I also just wanted to speak to Director Stone spoke about his charrette that was for Ladysmith and that they have sort of a plan in place. Would it be possible for the ones that have had their charrettes to also coordinate with the town of Ladysmith and how they worked through their process and what they're doing? Maybe Director Stone can speak to that.
I recognize Director Stone because it's directly connected to this conversation. Then I'll turn to Director Morrison after.
Yeah. So to be clear, it was a section in our charrette process was talking about moving through implementation. So we had a sort of 1 to 3 year, 3 to 5 year, and 5 years and beyond plan. Recognizing that something like a charrette and a local area plan it can be a multi-decade process, but we also understood that there were certain things that were impediments to progress that needed to be resolved in the front end to be able to allow the process to move forward. And that, of course, fed into our official community plan and a local area plan that then in the bylaws indicated some implementation strategies. So because that was included in the charrette process and then through the inclusion of that charrette process into the local area plan as part of the OCP, it allowed us the opportunity to provide some at least very, very high level financial and resource analysis. And then, of course, in the language, we also included flexibility based on market conditions, grant opportunities, et cetera. So if something in year 4 could be done in year 1 because of a grant opportunity, we could be flexible there. So yeah, we can provide some advice on that, but I think it's that next stage beyond the charrette. So it's about informing people during the charrette that there are costs associated with these things. We don't get to beautify for free. And some of those costs will be public, some will be grant, and some will be private. But then during the local area planning process is where we really tried to get a little bit more detailed in terms of implementation, having informed the community during the charrette. And then, of course, every year when you go on and embark on the next stage of those costs, it becomes that conversation in budgets again. So it's up to the elected officials to continue to endorse those expenditures over time to make sure that we can be successful in implementation. But yeah, point well taken, and I'm sure our planning staff would be happy to provide any insights they can on how to kind of include those pieces as we move forward.
Okay. We can move on to Director Morrison, please. I recognize Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I guess what strikes me is that not all charrettes are created equal. And I've been here long enough to see charrettes done and applauded, and then not much happened, no implementation. And yet it was really interesting to be sort of part of, as an observer, the think Shawnigan charrette, and so much was done there. But now we get to that point of the implementation, and this is where we bump into, as a regional district, that challenge as to how to fund and how to properly resource. And given that this is a regionally funded office that Mr. Reardon leads, we get that challenge where even if you were to do a South End charrette, it's electoral area specific and funded at least the body of it through the electoral areas. and you might have some crossover where you have a truly regional function that could be supported and funded and resourced by this department. But the limitations of regional districts is to have a regionally funded personnel in the regional district working specifically in electoral area area planning function. So I guess what I'm asking is, through to perhaps staff, how would they suggest that we move forward so that we could have a fair implementation and equal to all of the areas and the municipalities, so that we don't have to be asking this question, who's paying each time, because we're getting these great documents and these great community input, but they're really hard to action. And we want to be able to action something as intense as Think Shawnigan, but we keep turning and wondering who's going to pay for it.
I'm not too sure which staff could respond to this. I'm not seeing any hands up from any of the staff. So that I can.
Madam Chair, I'll take a stab.
Welcome, Mr.
Yeah. So I mean, that's always a challenge, I think, through the chair with regard to regionally funded services where we're doing individual work in electoral areas. And I always saw that was a bit of a challenge in terms of doing the design charrettes as to how we were going to execute those down the road, and what kind of funding service would be available to support the implementation of those. And I think there has been a bit of a disconnect there. So I would like to consult with staff and provide a more fulsome answer to that question. You know, those items come up often with these types of services where we're trying to find equity in terms of the delivery of those services, and it's complex, and I think it's something that we need to look at further, but it would not something I could answer right today.
And I think that we could be looking at all of them. Where do we go from here? We went into them as Cowichan Bay did as well, but it would be good to sort of define, this is what we've done, where do we go from here? And I would believe at this time in economic development with COVID-19, I would assume that it would be on the shelf for the moment until the resources. But anyway, we will see and wait for that report. Thank you, Mr. Crothers. I'm seeing no other hands up, and this was just for, oh yes, Director Acton. I recognize Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, I've forgotten Director Kuhn, but go ahead, Director Acton, and I'll go to Director Kuhn.
Okay. Perhaps people aren't totally familiar with our Think Shawnigan plan, and the COVID-19 is actually, so we've actually poised ourselves quite well by having this charrette, because we have a lot of projects that can be identified as recovery and important for that. And I think, as we succeed, we all succeed, and it's there's no boundaries and so much where we are perhaps maybe operating sub-regionally more than just Shawnigan, and then it expands out. And also by having the charrette, people have mentioned the local area planning, and that'll go into our modernization, and I think that's really important. What I'd also like to point out is, even as we are sitting here putting things on hold, our Think Shawnigan team is actually working away right now, and I would like to share this picture. I don't know if it's going to work. Maybe I won't try it today, but I do have a picture of 2 volunteers who are working on the planters in our village at the moment. They have partnered with the garden groups, and in our charrette to speak to grant funding and money opportunities, those are in there. And it's thinking of economic development. It's a long-term plan, and by having that community focus, it allows economic development to see the opportunities that will reach out regionally. Because I know that Mr. O'Riordan has spoken to me about different ideas about what could happen in Shawnigan. That's a regional focus. So it's when we have a broader lens, we can almost be more successful than just focusing on just ourselves sometimes.
Well,
So
I'm thinking Cowichan Bay as well. The beautification happened with the community, so it not necessarily needed to go through the economic development. The beautification was help from the area director, flower planters, and stuff like that. So that is a good thing that we could be doing in the meantime.
absolutely. And Ladysmith had involvement with economic development for their charrette, and that expands into North Oyster and Director Smith's area as well in Saltaire. So focusing on the benefits, it goes regionally. And to say that, our success, not Mr. O'Riordan or economic development, Cowichan is not involved in every step of the way, as you've pointed out. So the staff resources aren't necessarily a constant. And anyway.
Yeah, I think
they'll
be looked into. Yeah, thank you.
And I think we are poised to actually put some of these projects forward because of COVID-19.
That's awesome. Thank you, Director Acton. Just to follow up with Director Stone on that comment, or do you want to wait for Director Kuhn?
No, just the charrette fed into our economic development strategy. So Mr. O'Riordan and Economic Development Cowichan wasn't involved in the charrette process, but they were involved in the subsequent economic development strategy, which pulled in recommendations from the charrette. So that would be, and I was gonna talk to Directors Acton and especially the South Area directors about a coordinated sort of sub-regional economic development strategy, but that would be something for down the road, but definitely a great investment in time and resources.
Thank you for the clarification. I now acknowledge Director Kuhn. I recognize Director Kuhn.
Staff and the directors and everybody involved and the residents put a lot of effort into a charrette. There's a lot of money spent and a lot of time. I would like to see somehow a result, like a report back, let's say after 2 years or whatever, what actually has been done. Because I don't think we've ever done that. A charrette gets done and then, it's done. And it's maybe being worked out or whatever, but the board or we area directors never hear again how successful it actually was. And since there's a fair amount of effort being spent on charrettes, I think it would be justified to, and I realize in economic development, it is difficult to actually prove a success. We've been battling that for years on the board when the discussion came up, should we do away with economic development? I remember all these discussions many years ago. But a charrette, you can actually pinpoint, you can actually say, okay, this is what was pointed out in the charrette, and this is what the residents wanted. Okay, 2 years later, how much of that has been achieved? And I think that would be quite valuable, because somehow I find it difficult to just go along and say, okay, well, regional resources are going to be put into this area, and without ever finding out, well, was it really successful? So anyway, I'll put that out there.
Thank you, Director Kuhn. And this was for information. Looking to the committee if we can move on to R5. Ms. Legault, this is a report from the Economic Development Division, again, Tourism Cowichan 2020 Annual Work Plan and Financials. Could you please read the recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That it be recommended to the board that Tourism Cowichan 2020 Annual Work Plan and Financials, as outlined in the Economic Development Division staff report to the April 22nd, 2020 Regional Services Committee, be approved.
Now, I saw a hand go up. Director Wilson, are you moving the recommendation, or you would like to speak? And I also saw Director Smith. Are you? Okay, I recognize Director Wilson, please, first. And I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a real problem with this, considering what we've been discussing so far with COVID and tourism, and especially considering we've seen certain mayors and certain directors and other people around the island saying, stay off my island, stay out of my area, please, if you would. There's no need for this. So really, as far as I can see right now, we shouldn't be pushing any tourism, and we certainly shouldn't be funding it, considering that the province and other people have cut back the funding as well. I've got a real problem with this, and I can't support these financials at all.
Thank you. Microphone off, please. Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Director Sebring. I recognize Director Sebring.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Director Wilson for those comments. I had some of the same thoughts, and you know, I'm not saying we should stop all promotion, but while this COVID situation is ongoing, I really don't think it's consistent for us to, you know, ask the province to halt all non-essential ferry traffic on long weekends, and yet be sitting here at this table spending money on promotion of tourism and trying to drag people here. I fully acknowledge that we've done great work in this area. We do great work in this area when that time comes again. I'm just not sure now is the time. So, you know, I mean, I've read the report, and I'm wondering if there's some way that we can either redirect this spending or maybe just hold it in a reserve fund until we're ready to pull the trigger on actually doing tourism attraction again. But right now, I really wonder about the wisdom of allocating resources to tourism Cowichan when the balance of this summer looks to be pretty much in jeopardy in terms of even wanting people to come here. And I say that acknowledging that, you know, our business community needs some of those people to come here, but it's a real tough puzzle. I'll just leave it there right now. Thank you.
Okay, I have, I recognize Director Staples, please. And then Director Stone.
I feel like that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. I think that, you know, it's important for us to not promote tourism right now, obviously, but it's also important for us to be prepared for when we're ready to do so. And so I feel like with the direction, you know, with the direction that is what we're looking to do, we want these organizations to still continue to plan to be ready for when we do start to open up. And so I feel that it would be very short-sighted for us not to support this at this time. But with that understanding that, you know, that this is the situation we're in right now, and we're not going to start promoting it today or until we're ready to do so, but we want to be ready when that happens, and we want them to be ready when that happens.
Okay, thank you. I have a bit of a speakers list. Can you have a little patience with me? I am just going to read it out so that I'm clear who I've got. I have Directors Stone, Nicholson, Wilson, Smith, Alternate Director Haim, and Director Kuhn. And Director Acton. Okay, go ahead. I recognize Director Stone.
Thank you. Yeah, I just following on Director Staples' comments, I will note that Destination BC and Tourism Cowichan have been sort of advertising the Explorer Later. It's been a great program from Destination BC through the province, and that's been the direction to local tourism agencies, is to not to change their activities, but to change the message and continue to build their brands to make that attraction possible more easily once some of these restrictions are lifted. So, you know, I have you know, my first instincts were the same sentiments that were expressed by Directors Wilson and Sebring. However, when I started looking into the work of Destination BC and their advice from senior tourism agencies through to the regional ones, that they were talking about refocusing the message. So I do appreciate that challenge around timing. And I also, just technically speaking, would want to reflect on, you know, there was this comment made about holding those funds in reserve, about the agreements that we have with Tourism Cowichan, their agreements around MRDT, and our own funding agreements, whether that's even possible. So I don't know if staff can maybe comment on that, but I would say that there is some thought to, just like we are all doing as business people, we're marketing our businesses, focusing our energies on how we come out of this. You know, it's just something to consider when we're kind of looking at both sides of that coin.
So before I go to staff, if there is any staff that would like to comment, I'd like to ask Director Wilson to turn off his microphone, please. And is there any staff that wishes to respond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I might respond just to
go ahead.
To kind of bring some context to some of this. It is true that Destination BC have asked everyone to stop their paid advertising. So the only advertising that is taking place at this time is non-paid advertising. They haven't contributed any additional monies to paid advertising. And yeah, given this impact that has been felt throughout the tourism industry, and there are efforts to position the tourism industry to be able to respond to this when the right time comes. There needs to be an understanding within the overall budget of Tourism Belgium that they have lost a lot of funding to this point. The MRDT taxation, which comes from built accommodation, of course, is expected to drop significantly. They don't have an idea of the numbers, but that represents close to half of their overall budget. Also, their funding under Destination BC came in at about 80,000 less than they requested and budgeted. So whereas the funding that has been coming through the CDRD to Tourism Belgium once represented a small proportion of their money, albeit though it's a very important portion that's leveraged to get all this additional funding. Now it is the significant the amount of funding that they're getting is all the more important that we're providing, and the whole tourism industry depends on this funding and the ability for the marketing arm of the tourism industry, which is Tourism Belgium Society, to be able to react, adapt, and position the whole sector for recovery. I think given all those components, this funding is crucial for them to be able to move forward at the right time. Additional to that, they have shifted some of their activities to support local tourism. So the expectation right now is that as tourism does come back online and people are starting to move, then this won't be done globally. It'll be done first on a sub-regional level and Vancouver Island based, and then perhaps within driving distance, and then in the future, potentially when air traffic starts to build up, then it'll start to build up this way. And Tourism Belgium would love to present as a delegation once we have the capacity to do that, and they will be able to give a further update on their activities. But this is just to give some insights as to where they're positioned. They're supporting economic development and looking to position themselves to be able to support the sector at the right time when we're moving out of this. So that's just some context around this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. O'Riordan. I just wanted to let speakers know that a lot of the acronyms that we're using may not be familiar with our audience. So the MRDT, I believe, maybe you could just say what that is for us, Mr. O'Riordan, and then I'll carry on the speakers list. Sorry, are you not, can't hear me?
Maybe address them again.
Oh, so was that directed?
Yeah, I just,
that directed me, my
acronyms that we're using. Yeah, the things that we're using is MRDT, and I'm saying that the audience as a whole might not know. So if we can actually say the what the words are instead of that, it would be helpful. Oops. Okay.
I could possibly jump in and help on that. It's the municipal and regional district tax.
Thank you. And I move on to acknowledge, recognize Director Nicholson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to agree with some of the comments that have been made that it is really important to support tourism Cowichan to be ready for when this is over. And it's really important, I think, at this time to continue to spark and maintain interest in the Cowichan Valley through marketing. We don't want to be forgotten, so that's really important. And support for our businesses to innovate and do what they can virtually would be a really important role, I think. So I think the issue for me is that none of the paper we have to read, the reports don't really reflect the COVID situation. And I would be more comfortable referring this back to staff so that Tourism Cowichan could develop a work plan that speaks to the COVID-19 situation. And that, you know, really gives us some confidence that they're going to pivot their operations and be more innovative in the situation that we have.
I'd like to second that.
Okay, so that's a motion to refer. So on the motion, it's been moved and seconded. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? I do have a bit of a speakers list, but can I pass that? I still have Director Wilson. I have my speakers list as Wilson's. Well, this is to the motion, Director Wilson. I recognize Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, that's a good motion, and I can support that. And first of all, before we go any further, I'd like to congratulate Director Sebring, Staples, and Stone for the brevity and refreshing conciseness of what they've been saying. I wish we could have a lot more brevity on some of the things that are being said here. So basically what Barry has said is, yeah, by all means fund it, but change the message as well, which is exactly what Director Nicholson has said as well. So I can support this motion.
Thank you. I move to recognize Director Smith on the motion. Referral.
I support the motion to go back to staff, but I would like to see information about the impact of the amount of employment that's currently under the Tourism Cowichan. We've had reports on the types of work that takes place within the Cowichan Valley, and tourism areas were heavily employment areas for our area. So we do have people that are receiving either different benefits right now, and sometimes those benefits are a little bit more than the wages they're actually earning. So during the COVID-19, this can also impact the people coming back to work. So we want to encourage them to give more statistics on how many people are actually in the tourism industry within our valley, so that we know that we're supporting their future work and their recovery. Thank you.
Okay, I think they can take that as part of the message. Ms. Legault, could you actually read out the referral motion if you actually have one, just so that the staff is clear on the direction and we can.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's recommending that the Tourism Cowichan 2020 annual work plan and financials be referred to staff for more information on or incorporating COVID into the work plan.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much. Is everyone clear on that? I see I acknowledge Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the propriety of referral, so I'm a little confused by the motion because it seems like this is a referral back to Tourism Cowichan or a request for them to refine their message and to provide it back to us. So I'm not sure why we're referring it back to staff. And having read the report, I seem to glean from the report that they are absolutely addressing the current situation that we're in, and that they have reduced revenues, that they're changing messaging. It seems like the discussion that we've had around supporting this group and the work that they're doing is a consistent message that we want to continue to support. I'm wondering if we're just wanting to see more concrete details of what it is that they're actually putting out there and what the messaging is that we're putting out there. So if that's the case, then why are we referring it to staff? We should be referring it back to Tourism Cowichan, or what I would prefer to see is that we approve what's been put before us and ask them to bring supplemental information as to what the information is that we'd like to see out there. So I'm actually not going to support the referral motion because this is just another delay when I think we need to provide the leadership and support to the group and ask for that supplemental information to come to us. So I won't be supporting this resolution.
Okay, could I be clarify from the mover of this recommendation, Director Nicholson, could you clarify if you want this back to staff? Your motion was the motion not clear when it was reread, or maybe you can clarify for us.
Well, I believe probably Tourism Cowichan developed the work plan that we're looking at. So if they developed it, they should revise it.
And so
but if staff was involved in that, then fine.
So okay. All right. So the motion that's on the floor, the referral motion, you think is correct? What your intention was? Okay. Moving on now to Director Kuhn, and then
I'm sorry. Could you?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Could you refer? You'll have to read the.
You would like the.
You'll have to read it because I don't remember.
Okay. Could I have Ms. Legault reread the referral motion to us so that we're clear? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The way I had recorded it, it was to refer the Tourism Cowichan 2020 annual work plan and financials, etc., to staff to incorporate COVID information in the work plan.
So I'm recognizing Director Nicholson. Is that your referral, or would you like to add something?
Well, I would just like to confirm with Mr. O'Riordan that it would be appropriate to go to Tourism Cowichan, would it not?
Mr. O'Riordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In this circumstance, what would normally happen is that Tourism Cowichan Society would present as a delegation to committee to give clarity on their current operations. I did discuss with them before preparing this report if they could provide additional analysis on what changes were being made with regard to their budget and their operational plan as a result of this. And the information coming back was that because things are changing on a day-to-day basis, that it's very difficult for them to be able to give a clear outline on exactly how this is going to play out as it's working for all of us. So maybe my suggestion here would be that once we have the ability to do a delegation, that Tourism Cowichan come and present on their current status and what they have changed, and at that point to request that they do provide updated information on how this has impacted both their financials and their operation plan moving forward. The report that's included here is based on the MRDT, that's the Municipal District Regional Tax application that went in October 2009 or November 2019, and that plan will have had to change based on the subsequent reduction in funding, as well as reacting to the information coming from Destination BC. But I wonder if we request them to come back in 1 month with an update, it may be that that plan will again change 1 month later, and you will be requesting the same information for a second time. So that's where I've seen it, and I'm not sure our capacity to take delegations at this time. So I'm wondering if they did come back with updates, then it would be beneficial if they were the ones that presented those updates, so that it was from the horse's mouth, as it were. And I'm not sure we have the capacity to do that at this time.
Do you have a follow-up, Director Nicholson?
Well, I have a comment. When I look at this material and I look at attachment A, I really feel that there should be the Tourism Cowichan should be thinking through a strategy for Cowichan. It's worth the wait type of a strategy, and I get strategy, plans and strategies change and have to accommodate whatever's happening, but I think that there needs to be some thinking, and they've obviously started a little bit, judging from some of the things that you've said, but I think that they need to do some deeper thinking before we commit to spending a ton of money on this, and the money's in the budget, so it's there. It's just that I would like some more reassurance that they're thinking strategically. Heavens, I was kind of interested in this subject, and I started to look at some of the other areas in the world where they are facing this kind of a thing, and they have got some pretty amazing kind of turnaround, innovative strategies already up and running in places like New Zealand and Australia. So I don't understand why we couldn't at least put something down on paper that reflects the thinking that we need to do right now on this.
So with your referral motion, you're saying to staff, but it should be to Tourism Cowichan? I think, is that where because I'm wondering, that sounds to me like you would like this referred back to Tourism Cowichan, not our staff.
Would, but I would hope that Mr. O'Riordan will collaborate with them on this.
Okay. So I'm not sure. Okay, I'm moving on to Director Kuhn and then alternate Director Haim, and maybe I'll be clearer by the end of that. I'm recognizing Director Kuhn.
Yes, I would be much in favor of just delaying this whole process by 3 months. Just shove it back, bring it back in 3 months. I can't see that in the next 3 months anything will happen with tourism. And the mentioning of earlier of New Zealand and Australia, well, they hardly have any cases of the virus down there, so they're in a totally different situation.
Thank you. I recognize alternate Director Haim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't support the original motion as in the agenda because the work plan doesn't reflect the current economic and operational reality in relation to Tourism Cowichan. With regards to the concern about referring it to staff for amendment, it is the tourism group's, it's their plan, it's their work plan, it's their budget. So I'm going to propose an amendment to the amendment. And rather than just referring it to staff, refer it to staff to work with Tourism Cowichan to update the work plan and budget to reflect the COVID-19 situation.
Okay, on the amendment, it's been seconded. And so on the amendment, anybody want to speak to the amendment? Director Wilson, I recognize Director Wilson and Director Acton. Sorry, Director Morrison.
I don't believe we amend amendments.
Oh, sorry, because we were on our first. Well, actually, what I was trying to get to was to clarify Director Nicholson's by adding the Tourism Cowichan in it, which I think was the intent of her original, but so I don't know if we have to amend. So I'm turning to alternate Director Haim.
Just a question to staff with regards to the concern drawn up by Director Morrison. My experience in the past has been typically amendments can go 2 layers deep and no further. I don't know whether that's covered by the legislation or whether it's covered by a procedure bylaw. If Ms. Legault could comment on that.
Ms. Legault?
Thank you, Chair. As I have it currently recorded, is there is no amendment. The motion on the floor was to refer to staff, and there was not finalized any secondary amendment to Tourism Cowichan or anything further. So Alternate Director Haynes' motion would be the first amendment to the recommendation.
Thank you. That's what I thought too. Director Nicholson? Acknowledge Director Nicholson. Director Morrison, turn off your microphone. Director Nicholson?
My intent is that it go to Tourism Cowichan. So if I could just have the
friendly
motion,
amendment by
amended.
Can we do that, Ms. Legault?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The concept of a friendly amendment isn't really recognized in parliamentary procedure.
It's not an amendment, it's a referral motion.
However, yes.
Sorry. Okay, so it's a referral motion and you'd like to add Cowichan, Tourism Cowichan to your motion? Okay. So on that, I turn to, still on the referral, I turn to Director Kuhn. Recognize Director Kuhn.
I've already spoken. I've issued my statement.
Director.
Yeah, I think I was next on the list, wasn't I?
Just a minute. Maybe you were. Okay, I had Director Acton though. Director Acton, would you still like to go?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will support that motion. I was kind of leaning that way as well, just out of respect for our taxpayers, our local businesses. I think we actually are making a decision without knowing exactly what, or at least making it a little early without knowing how things are going to unfold here. But I do believe what Director Nicholson has stated about being local is really important. And so how Tourism Cowichan is going to support our local businesses and the local tourism, and that will be part of our recovery period, I think is really important. So I'll be supporting the motion to refer. And perhaps they could just come back when they are presenting.
Okay, thank you. I turn to recognize Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we've beaten this one to death, and to be quite honest, the amount of people who are supporting this referendum, I think we should just call the question.
The referral question, are we clearly, so it's the referral, can we have it one more time, Ms. Legault, if I've got it right? Ms. Legault, we can't hear, oh, sorry.
Thank you, sorry, I was just conferring, but I believe that Alternate Director Haynes had an amendment on the floor that was seconded. So we should vote on the amendment first and then the motion as amended.
Okay, so we're voting on the amendment, which is to put in Tourism Cowichan. All in favor? Opposed, if any?
Madam Chair, for clarity, can I hear the amendment as written?
Ms. Legault?
Thank you. Perhaps isn't as well formulated as it could be at this moment, but essentially the amendment was to add referring to Tourism Cowichan to update the work plan and budget.
Okay, is everybody clear on the amendments now? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Seeing Director Nicholson is opposed. Okay, we're moving on now to the motion as amended. This is Director Morrison.
Excuse me.
I recognize Director Nicholson.
This is the second time that this has happened in the meetings. I think my responses are delayed on your end, so I voted for that motion, that amendment.
Thank you. There is a delay because your hand was up on, yes, thank you. So she voted for that, and I recognize Director Morrison.
So I guess it's a question perhaps to the mover, and we're talking about being prepared and current and dealing with this, I'm struggling to find out how the motion, which is to amend the work plan and the budget, is going to help us with what it sounds like we're asking is for them to amend the messaging that they're producing. So is the motion truly reflective of what we're asking Tourism Council?
So you're asking this from the mover, which I turn to Director Nicholson.
Okay, I think I'm on. So I am it was about the work plan, and so I think that's pretty clear. It's the activities that the goals and the activities that they think that they'll be doing this year to address the COVID thing. And so there may be some adjustment in the budget, but I mean, I would be prepared for them to be developing a work plan based on what they have requested comes from us, because I think that's what they're going to need.
Okay, thank you very much. We're moving on to R6. R6 is a report from the Environmental Services Division, Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program, Technical Advisory Team, Terms of Reference.
We haven't voted.
Oh, I thought, we didn't vote on the
motion as amended, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm just moving right along. Okay, all in favor of the motion that's been amended, the amended motion. It's been moved. I mean, it's been approved. Motion's passed. Now I'm starting to fall apart here. Okay, moving on now to R6. May I? Any opposed? Sorry. No. Opposed. Director Morrison is opposed. Just wanted to state that. And moving on now to R6, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Chair. R6 is a report from the Environmental Services Division on the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program Technical Advisory Team Terms of Reference, and this report is for information.
Is there any questions on this? Any discussion? Seeing none, moving on to R7. Oh, Director Nicholson? Sorry, the delay. Director Nicholson?
I'm sorry, my connection is very bad. I can't see any of you because it's so...
We're all a blur.
Difficult. It's probably a good thing. I'd like to make some comments about R7 because I was very disappointed in this report. And I'd like to start by...
actually, sorry, we're on R6.
Oh, sorry. Okay, what's R6?
R6 is in a Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program Technical Advisory Team Terms of Reference.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, recognizing Director Morrison. Oh, Director Haim, sorry. Director Haim first. Recognizing Director Haim, alternate Director Haim.
Thank you. Just a question to staff with regards to the report under financial considerations. It has none at this time, and it makes reference to the members themselves. Are there not financial considerations with regards to the support that staff will be providing, recognizing the team has 23 members, and I do realize they come from different areas, but is there no expectation of staff time and therefore resources?
It's a question to staff. Who on staff could take this?
I can take it, Chair.
Thank you.
It's Kate Miller. So the staff time has been included in the budget in respect to the staff time provision for the overall program itself. So there's no additional budget beyond what's already been allocated in the 2020 budget.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much, Ms. Miller. Moving on now, now hands are okay. Director, I recognize Director Morrison, Nicholson, and Acton. I recognize Morrison, Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I guess this would be through to staff. I'm just looking at in the attachment, the membership criteria selection, and this is one of those circumstances where drinking water and watershed, a lot of the work is going to be done in the more rural and remote areas, and not necessarily a population-based sort of approach. And I would ask through you to staff if they feel that the recommended 3 CVRD staff members in number 1 on the list are adequate in representing the technical requirements of all of the electoral areas that this function will be covering. I see that we've got good representation from North Couch and from our municipal partners. Is the 3 recommended members sufficient to cover off all the needs of the 9 electoral areas?
Ms. Miller, would you be able to answer that?
Absolutely, I'd be pleased to. The objective is to have fairly wide representation, as you note, geographically, but we also respect the reality that there are limits to staff time. And so there is an opportunity for planning department or planning division staff to participate on the technical team. And the expectation would be that they would be the conduit back to that department or division in terms of emerging issues, but that not every planner needs to be on the team, that it's a technical conduit. So that's the hope. That would be for the electoral areas, and the same would be for the municipalities that are participating. The only municipalities that don't have a lot of capacity, and typically you have a staff member that wears multiple hats, would be, for example, the town of Lake Cowichan.
Thank you. Moving on to Director, I recognize Director Nicholson. So I have Nicholson, Acton, and Kuhn. Am I correct? Good. Recognizing Director Nicholson.
Are we providing support for community members to participate?
Ms. Miller?
We're not providing financial recompense for community members to participate. That's not typically something that we do. If there is need for a meeting over a meal, then typically we provide a light refreshment, but there is no other compensation.
Thank you. Moving on now. Sorry. Follow up, Director Nicholson.
Follow up, and that includes there's no support for First Nations to participate.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. The First Nations participation is slightly different. We've left an open number of seats depending on the ability of our First Nations communities and technical folks to participate. It is a technical working group. We do have a separate focus program within the drinking water program overall with regards to ongoing focus dialogue with the First Nations communities. And so that's a separate, more robust program that's looking specifically at what their issues or interests are within their area of traditional territory or their area of interest. So it's kind of a separate issue. There is a little bit of money there within the program, recognizing that many of the knowledge holders within the communities are elders, and so there is an opportunity for potential honoraria or enhanced capacity building within those communities. That's not part of the role of the overall technical advisory team itself. It's a more CVRD government to government relationship building process.
Thank you. I move now to Director Acton. So I recognize Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I'm incorrect here, but I feel like this program has taken a long time to set up. The Area B has already given a couple grant needs to have our own water testing done. And this technical team, I'd like to understand, where does Shawnigan Lakes stand in the sense of the water testing, because of our large amounts of soil dumping that's occurring, that we were told would happen, so that we could make reference to planning and check our soil bylaw if that's working. And then I'm also concerned about the Fisher Road Aquifer. They're being supported right now, and yet this is still not up and running. And in Mill Bay, we have a large amount of water deficiency. And then we have the Coxsila River, that is also an Area B facing issues. So the whole South is really struggling. And I think the South Cowichan community expected this to be implemented and running already. So I'm looking to staff to see what kind of timelines are we looking at, and are we behind?
Ms. Miller?
Thank you, through the chair, to the directors. As you know, the program went live last year with a recommendation for staffing and implementation of the program in key areas. The direction of the board was to implement a public process to develop the overall strategy, which went to the board in February of this year with a strategy that the board approved. We're in the process of implementing that strategy. One of the key components, obviously, is the capacity with regards to staff time. So there was a recommendation that there also be staff hired for the program. Given the current COVID situation and the draw on staff, the hiring process was on temporary hold, but I understand that that is now moving forward with HR's support. So that's a very positive note. I would also like to comment with regards to the issue of not having works ongoing, even though we don't have dedicated staff for the program currently in place. We are, in fact, working with the available staff resources to put together a number of things. For example, we've got a groundwater observation well that recently went in the Coxsila system. We've undertaken the testing of groundwater on Fisher Road. That's been completed for this year already. We're in the process of finalizing the Mill Bay and the Cowichan Bay water quality objectives reports, and those are very close to being published. We're in the process of finalizing the long-term water quality collection strategy because we didn't have the technical advisory team for the overall process in place. We have a specialized technical advisory team made up of both community members as well as technical advisors from the province and our municipal partners to develop the regional water quality, surface water quality monitoring program. Those documents have recently been received, and we anticipate finalizing that process within the next month or so. One of the other components with that process was being able to work with community members in terms of a standardized methodology for data capture of the key elements that we're looking at in certain locations. So that includes the development of a training process, a training manual that clearly articulates where the sites are, et cetera. One of the challenges that we're facing right now is the issue with regards to COVID and having groups go out or to provide training for folks. So we're looking at how we might deploy those training processes and documents. And we're also working with the province because they also have a parallel process. So I think while that we haven't had the opportunity to communicate on a regular basis to the committee with regards to all of the moving pieces with this particular program, there is a substantial amount of work that is currently on the books and ongoing.
Follow up, Director Acton, and then I have Directors Kuhn and Smith. And this was for information. Your microphone, Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to Ms. Miller. So thanks, Ms. Miller. It sounds like there is a lot going on behind the scenes, and we look forward to all of it coming together soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kuhn. I recognize Director Kuhn.
I presume the technical advisory team will also be involved in the construction of the new weir that is planned. And I would like to make a comment to that effect. I'm a little bit dismayed about the fact that there is no representative from the lake, and yet the people around the lake are the most affected by any change in the weir. And there is no representative either on the TAT or else on the watershed board from the lake, and I think it's disgusting, quite frankly.
Thank you.
If I may make a clarification.
Go ahead,
Apologies.
Sorry.
I want to be very clear. When we went forward to the community with the discussion of the drinking water and watershed protection function and the new program, there are two key components to that. One is water quality, drinking water as well as background environmental water quality, but also sustainable water for community use. We were also very clear at the time that this was not a mechanism that we were going to pay for the weir. That was really outside of the construct of the drinking water and watershed protection function. We're looking at long-term water supply. With regards to the weir itself, we do have another program, a parallel and supporting program, which is completely funded by external sources, being DFO, not the residents of the community, which is focused on two key environment or engineering objectives at this time. We finished in 2018 the water use planning process that identified what volume of water we needed to store for long-term sustainable deposition into the river, as well as the impact on shoreline properties. What we didn't identify at the time was who is going to be the license applicant in order to move forward with the actual capital works required and the regulatory approvals to do so. There are two key components that are really missing before we can do that. One is an understanding of what is it going to cost to build the weir and what are the technical complexities around removing the existing structure. It's a very complicated process in some ways. And the other was an understanding, a detailed understanding and liability with regards to what the impact may be on property owners around the lake or shoreline around the lake. And so those are two detailed technical analyses that we're focused on right now in order to provide support to any future organization or entity in terms of a decision to move forward on building the capital works. That process does have a CVRD advisory team made up of the finance group and the engineering group for the most part, as well as a dedicated project manager, Mr. Leroy Van Wieren. There is also a partners technical team, which is made up of representatives from Cowichan Tribes, Paper Excellence, and the Watershed Board, as well as the town of Lake Cowichan, because obviously the works are within their territory. There is a public process which is going to be kicking off in the very near future with regards to having an opportunity for the public to provide input into the design parameters of what a weir might look like within the community. So there is ample opportunity for the public to provide input as well as various organizations.
Follow up, Director Kuhn, and I have Director Smith, and I'm conscious of the time. I recognize Director Kuhn. Follow up.
Yes, I appreciate what Kate just mentioned. That's fine, but I have to emphasize there is no representation of the population of the lake involved, and that is, in my view, it's not acceptable.
Is Director recognizing Director Stone? Microphone, Director Stone.
Sorry, I think Director Smith was in the speakers list before me.
Yes, yeah, but I thought you were directly. I know I have her, but I wondered if you were
I'll
responding
speak to it when it's my opportunity.
Okay.
It was just this is nothing to do with the report that we're reviewing.
Oh, okay. Director Smith, I recognize you. This is on the information R6. Go ahead.
Yes, through the chair to the staff, can you advise what the 3 technical representatives, regional ENGOs, who those are, and the qualifications for those positions?
Ms. Miller.
Thank you. I was just reminded that I should turn on my camera as well. I thought it was disruptive.
Okay.
Apologies.
That's okay.
When we had the input process into the development of an overall strategy, we've got a number of community groups, ENGOs across the region. The question is, do we have geographical location, et cetera? We did have quite a bit of discussion with the ENGOs as a smaller working group. And I think our preference is that we don't designate. We leave it to that group, and we're more than happy to host and facilitate structured discussion around what the best process would be. But as you know, the technical advisory group is getting to be a fairly large size. And so we'll be working with them to identify the appropriate representative, whether it's the Stewardship Roundtable or the Cowichan Watershed Board or the Green Blue from the North End or the Shawnigan Basin Authority, whatever. We will leave it to them to put forward an appropriate name and a process so that there is appropriate input. The one challenge that becomes interesting is when we're looking at, and we'll try to break out the whole issue about funding of these groups if we do have representatives of the group at the table. So that's the only place where there could be some minor issues with regards to conflict.
Director Kuhn, do you have another question for Ms. Miller? Follow up?
No, just a comment.
I do have you, Ms. Director Smith. I do have you, but
when we did away with regional.
Sorry, let me, just a minute. Hold it, Director. I'm going to acknowledge, go back to Director Smith. It was her question. I got mixed up. It was your question. So I'm going to acknowledge Director Smith and come back to you. My apologies. Director Smith, are you happy with that?
I would like a follow-up, because I think that when you look at all the electoral areas and all the different, Shawnigan has a group there's other groups in other areas. And if you only are having 3, then some of the areas are actually going to be left out. So I think it's really important. Those 3, I would understand that the Cowichan Water Board Society covers a fairly large area when it just comes to that, but that's a very specific area. And when you start to get up into Director or Alternate Director Hames area, there's things there. There's things for Ladysmith, Saltaire. So it's sort of. The question is on this, in this terms of reference, these ENGOs the 3 may not be the right connection. And how will we know that as directors, whether we feel comfortable with the 3 that are chosen, because they may not represent our areas? Can staff please indicate?
Absolutely. So one of the challenges that we've got 17 watersheds, and within each of the watersheds, in some situations, we've got multiple community groups operating, and so it's very challenging for us. We didn't want to break it down by electoral areas with one representative from each other areas. It's a watershed-based program. And so given the priorities of the program and the process, we're hoping that, and certainly our experience working with the ENGOs in the development of the overall strategy was very positive, where there was a great deal of trust that the issues that were being brought forward by a particular group really reflected the interest and the needs of other groups as well. And so is there a forum, or is there a way that we can support them communicating actively amongst themselves at the table, as opposed to just making the table bigger and bigger, which in some ways takes away from the ability of the table to be tactical and provide input. So that's the challenge that we're balancing. And one of the original components that our thinking was, well, should we have an opportunity for a representative of the North? And we would let the North, as ENGOs, decide what the best representative would be, and then the southern area, and then the central sector, because those are the three main areas where there's differences to some of the pressures within the system. And so that was the approach in terms of why we identified 3 as probably the best operational number that we could work with.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Alternate Director Sandhu and then Director Kuhn. I recognize Alternate Director Sandhu.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that I sit on the Cowichan Watershed Board as a representative for the town Lake Cowichan. So there is a representative from our area up west.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I move to recognize Director Kuhn.
Yes, in essence, what we're doing here is we're doing regional grant in aid. And we're doing that through the Watershed Board. And it's in a way, we're deciding for the public as to which of the ENGOs, we're not even deciding, it's the group that is deciding on behalf of us for the taxpayer, which group should be supported with money that we gave to the Watershed Board. It's a convoluted way, but as far as I'm concerned, so the representatives and the residents are out of the loop. We're just paying, and I on the very principle of it, I just don't agree with that. I think it should always be the public who decides what is happening to their money, and it shouldn't be funneled through like the Watershed Board, and then the Watershed Board does this. And so the money then ends up in NGOs that really should have applied independently for funding. And since we don't do regional grant in aid anymore, there would be a dead issue anyway.
Ms. Miller.
If I may clarify, this staff report and the recommendations relate to the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program, and the input and technical input into the kind of the refinement of the strategy and the work plan, and input to some of the questions that we may have as we move forward. The technical advisory group is not being asked whether or not they should be funding ENGOs or the direction. It's with regards to the strategy that was tabled at the board and the board approved in terms of what we're doing. The second item relates to funding of ENGOs, and that's report R7. So this report is really around how do we do the best job, most professional job possible with the highest level of professional input to the strategy that the board has approved.
Thank you. So I'm moving on to R7, seeing no other hands up. Moving on to R7, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R7 is a report from the Environmental Services Division regarding response to the committee referral on Cowichan Watershed Board funding, and that report is also for information.
Okay, that's for information. Seeing no hands up, I see one director's. I recognize Director Smith. And then Nicholson.
I was looking at the funding, and I noticed that this funding that would be allocated to the Cowichan Watershed Board is 14% of the total budget. Over half of the taxation funding for this budget comes from areas that have their own watershed aquifer quality, quantity, funding needs. For example, the Chemainus River, aquifers, and watersheds throughout the CVRD. In my opinion, the Cowichan Watershed Board is a very unique group, and the work that is done by this group is greatly appreciated and very beneficial. A new service should be created for the funding of this group by the areas that are attached to the Cowichan River, Cowichan Lake, and Kokosala River. There seems to be a large amount of money going to one specific group that is something when it comes to 14% of the budget going to one specific group. I'm not in favor of the funding for the Cowichan Watershed Board.
Okay, I'm moving on to, I have Director Nicholson. I recognize Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I'd like to remind you that this report is about a $690,000 budget. It wasn't mentioned in the report, so let's remember to keep that in mind. It's a large budget. And I'd like to make a motion to repurpose $40,000 of that $690,000 budget to help build capacity in the community to work with us to protect our water and watersheds. I hope I have a seconder for that, and if I do, I'd like to speak to it.
Who is us? I'm confused on us. In your, you do have a seconder, but I just want to clarify. Oh, okay. Okay, it's been moved and seconded.
All of us. So I'd like to speak to that if I may.
Go ahead.
So the COVID-19 has been a wake-up call about how we need to start thinking more seriously about how we manage crises that are biological and ecological in nature. And, we know climate change is coming, and there's all sorts of crises that our community is facing on the drought front and could face on the wildfire front and flooding and so forth, on top of things like a pandemic. So the future belongs to us and what we choose to do with it. And I think we need to choose differently. What I think we need to do, really think seriously about how we can work in partnership with the community to get things done. We can't do everything alone. We've learned, we're seeing in spades the lesson that we need to work together. And I get that as a government organization, one of our jobs is to set the rules and be accountable for tax dollars and so forth, monitor and report out on what we do with them, the outcomes. But I don't think that precludes trusting people who are working hard in the community, who have skills and expertise, to work with them on our shared goals. And, I think the $40,000 that I'm asking to be reallocated to support community is a small token of the capacity that they need to build to help us. And it would send a pretty clear message that we believe in the community, that we value the work that they're doing, and we will be supportive of working together on the challenges up ahead. Of the $40,000, I also would like $25,000 to go to the Cowichan Watershed Board. They've been operating for 10 years on a fixed income of $50,000 from the CVRD. They have done remarkable work, but today we're dealing with lots of water issues, and they are being stretched extremely thin now. I think that it's time that they got a raise. All of the dollars that we give them go to supporting 2 part-time staff members, and I think some security moving forward so that they can participate in things like this technical advisory committee if they're invited, that we talked about previously, without it taking away from their core goals, would be important. Finally, I'd like to say that I am really disappointed in the staff report. We asked for implications of moving $40,000 out of the proposed budget that we were presented into doing something like this. We asked for the implications, why we and what we heard from this in the staff report is why we should not do it, but no information on the budget impacts. So I am disappointed. Thank you.
I recognize Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just in considering when this item first came up, we had approved the functions work plan. We had approved the budget, and this was, as I recall, a last-minute request made by the previous speaker. And it was referred to staff, and we have received a report back from staff. And I just read from near the end of the report, it says, at this time, we do not have a request from the Cowichan Watershed Board to increase the level of annual support funding. Staff do not recommend raising the level of support at this time. And I think that's very clear. I'm also concerned about the fact that we are in a crisis, and one of the things as the local government is that we be thoughtful and responsive to the crisis and to issues that are raised, and I really warn against being reactive. And I think we've got very clear wording from staff in the report, and I think it's a steady as she goes, and I won't be supporting this the resolution that's on the floor.
Thank you. I turn to recognize alternate Director Haim, and then I will call the question. I will call the question.
Thank you. First, if I might, just a question to the mover, and then a follow-up. The reallocation of $40,000 from where?
Director Nicholson.
Well, that was what we asked staff to advise us on, but you know, if I recall, the budget that we approved included quite a bit of money towards monitoring wells. And I know when you dig a well, you don't know how much it's going to cost. So I'm quite sure that there's flexibility in this budget.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't support something where it's let's shift money to there without a direction as to where it's coming from. And then secondly, with regards to the Cowichan Watershed Board, and they've been around a long time and they've done good work. As somebody from the north end here, where we're not part of those watersheds, to me that's a substantial amount to contribute to that area on an ongoing basis, effectively becoming an operational line item. I think from the standpoint of thinking more regionally, I'm challenged in supporting an increase in that area.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Ms. Legault to read the recommendation, and then we'll call the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I may need some assistance with this, but as I've reported it, is that $40,000 be reallocated towards support and information for the community, with $25,000 of the 40 allocated to the Cowichan Watershed Board.
Mover, is that correct? Just double checking. Recognizing Director Nicholson. Okay. All right. So I call the question. All in favor? Calling the question, taking my time. I got 1, 2, 3, 4. You're in favor, Director Stone. 5. The motion is failed, defeated. And moving on now to, oh, I lost my place in time. I don't know how that happened, but I believe it is a motion. It would be public input. Ms. Legault?
Thank you. There's no other business item, so it will be moving to question period.
Question period, thank you. So do we have any questions?
We do. I'm just going to my email here. I have first item is from Susan Kaufman that says, Madam Chair, thank you for speaking to acronyms used. MRDT was on my list for question period. Further to the economic development, tourism, Cowichan, and COVID-19 response and recovery, can economic development highlight or promote the local businesses that are adapting their operations in response to COVID? Many are offering free delivery, arranging for pickup or private shopping opportunities to sustain their bottom lines and keeping their doors open during the crisis.
I believe they're all trying to do their best on that. Everybody is flying at that right now, I think currently trying to do their best with the local markets and local businesses.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I have a second submission. Madam Chair, I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. On today's agenda are to report from the Parks and Trails Division, re Parks and Trails Tree Management Policy. Question is, how is this policy developed? What public or Parks Commission's input has taken place for the development of this new policy, and when and where did it take place? Third question is, when new subdivisions are developed besides CVRD parkland, are the trees taken into consideration for safety? He goes on to say, I know of one case in Cowichan Bay where a house in a new subdivision was built within about 25 feet of CVRD park's trees. A tree blew down in a windstorm a few months ago and damaged a new home. And planning and parks insist on proper buffer zones from parklands to prevent lawsuits against the CVRD.
Actually, those are a lot of questions, and I'm not sure if I could answer them correctly from Parks, so I'll have to get back to Mr. Evans on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no further items.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes, who is that?
It's Christopher. With respect to 5.7, you didn't actually ask for a show of hands for people who are opposed. And because some people do not raise their hands when they're in favor, I wonder if that's a prudent thing to do.
Yeah, my apologies if I didn't. I try to always remember the ones that were opposed. Staff is also following it. We could clearly see the hands that were in favor, if that's helpful.
But a point of order, Madam Chair, if you don't raise your hand in the affirmative or negative, the local government or the community charter at least says you're deemed to have voted in the affirmative. I'm not sure
Correct.
what the local
That
government
is correct. Yes.
So on that basis, it might not be a bad idea to Director Justice's point.
Yes, and I
for the negative votes.
Yeah, my apologies on that. I believe that one I didn't ask for opposed.
No, you didn't.
My apologies. I'm still learning this stuff, and there's lots of stuff, screens and flashing, and so my apologies on that. So a motion to adjourn?
Well, for the record, can we have the negative votes, the hands raised on that issue, just so that staff has them? I'm not sure if they're recorded in the minutes, but I think it's important.
Okay, so 5.7. I didn't get Mr. Director of Justice 5.7. What was it?
It was to Director Nicholson's motion of reallocating those funds within that function.
Oh, R7 and okay, R7. So can I have those that are opposed to Director Nicholson's request? So I have Director Smith, Director Morrison, Director Kuhn, Alternate Director Haim, Director Acton, Director Wilson, and Director Sebring. Opposed.
Madam Chair?
Alternate Director Sandhu. I've got Alternate Director Sandhu. I recognize Alternate Director Sandhu first. Go ahead. Alternate Director Sandhu.
So I'm opposed to the motion.
Sorry, and I didn't call your name. My apologies. Okay, and so there's also add Alternate Director Sandhu to the opposed, and I turn to Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to declare conflict because on that vote.
the vote had already happened. So you actually would have left the room before we voted and declared what your conflict is. Sorry.
It wasn't asked.
It's all done.
No, you don't get asked. You actually have to declare it yourself before we have the motion. So you have to declare and state to the committee why you have a conflict and then leave the room. So my apologies if you didn't get that. I know that you've left the room before, but it's up to you to declare the conflict.
Fine.
Right, Ms. Legault? Okay, I have Director Morrison.
Move to adjourn.
Motion to, been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. See you in a bit. Bye-bye.